going to try and start on time so we can finish early. And I'm going to read the required opening statement. I'll turn the microphone on and you'll be able to hear. And it says, "This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment being held on Wednesday, the 26th of September, 2018 at 7:30 p.m. in the municipal complex. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this regular meeting has been provided by prominently displaying the schedule of regular meetings on the official notice board in the municipal complex and by transmitting a copy of this schedule to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Trenton Times, the Trentonian, and Comcast Cable of New Jersey, Inc. A copy was also filed with the clerk of Princeton." So, would you call the roll for us, please, Claudia?
Mr. Cohen?
Present.
Ms. Coulson?
Present.
Mr. Davidge?
Present.
Mr. Floyd?
Present.
Mr. Shriver? Mr. Tenenbaum?
Here.
Mr. Vilvanis? Ms. Chen?
Here.
Ms. Lambrose?
Here.
Chairman Royce?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, we have some busy work to do. The first of which is the minutes of July the 25th, 2018. A corrected copy of those was put out on the desk for us when we came in, but the basic material was circulated. Are there any changes that need to be made? Any comments, questions? If not, I'd like a motion to approve the minutes as written and a seconder for that motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a seconder?
Second.
We have a seconder for the motion. Could you call the roll for us then, Claudia?
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Coulson?
Yes.
Mr. Davidge?
Yes.
Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
Chairman Royce?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The second thing is an approval of a finding of fact, which is file number Z1818-626. That was circulated with the package that you got on the Saturday or thereabouts. And I have on page 3 in the fourth paragraph, if you count the top short piece as a paragraph, we state, as currently exists on the first floor and will extend, and I don't think we need to say how much, but it would extend slightly over the deck. That should be changed. And then the board further finds that the requested, and it says only 4%, but I think it should just be 4% over the existing coverage. And then we have a similar thing on the penultimate line, representing an increase of approximately less than 1%. Well, of approximately 1% is a better statement for that. For those niggles, I find this finding accurate. If any of the others of you have got corrections or changes you feel should be made, you should do so now. If not, a motion to approve as modified and a seconder to the motion will get us into business.
I'll make a motion to approve as modified.
We have a motion to approve. Is there
Yeah,
a
I'll
second
second.
to the motion?
Yeah, I'll second.
We have a seconder. And you'll call the roll for us, Claudia?
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Coulson,
Yes.
Mr. Davidge,
Yes.
Mr. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Tannenbaum.
I was
No?
absent during that meeting. I don't think I'm allowed to vote on that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Chairman Royce,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so we come to the first of the cases this evening, and that is 374 Cherry Hill Road. That has a case number somewhere, if I can find it. And the case number on that one is Z1818-619. And we have the attorney here. What I will do is to ask Mr. Bridger to read the essence of his memorandum to the board into the record, and then I'll ask you to make your case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bridger.
Swear you in for the evening. Do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you.
Good evening. The applicants, Michael and Elma Schmidt, are back again on 374 Cherry Hill Road. After the last meeting, they've revised their application, they've made a few changes. The addition on the right side of the house has been moved back from the right sides, or, excuse me, the left side of the house has moved back from the left side, setback approximately 4 feet, and the second story has been eliminated. The previous plans reflected an addition over the garage. The current plans maintain the existing roof line and add a small stairwell addition at the rear of the garage to provide access to the maid's quarters on the second floor. Following is a recap of the variances and the changes from the last submission. The side setback that required is 40 feet. The previous submission was 9.1 feet. It is now 14.7 feet to the steps of the addition. Left side setback, 40 feet. Previous submission was 9.1. This was for the AC. Now it is 12.1 feet. The left side setback was no change on that. The right side setback is no change. Setback to height ratio, the requirement's 1.5 to 1, and the previous submittal was 1.5 to 3.7 now, and now it is 1.5 to 1.5, and that's to the garage stairwell addition. There's another height to setback ratio for the new one-story addition, as the requirement's 1.5 to 1, and the previous submittal was 1 to 2.04. The current is 1.5 to 1.04. And they've also constructing a deck and a masonry terrace that will encroach into the side yard setbacks. Regarding the deck, the previous submittal reflected a setback of 22.6. Now the setback has been moved back to 28.7. The requirement is again 40. And the left side deck is requirements 40. The previous submission was 26.5, and the current is 14.7. The left side fireplace was not in the plans before. There's a 40-foot setback, and the current setback is 13.1 feet. The right side setback of the patio, the previous submittal was 22.6. The current's 32.3. And they still have the stormwater basin located at the rear of the house, and that setback hasn't changed. That's just a recap of the changes since the last application. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to address them.
Good.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions? No. No. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Dino Spadaccini on behalf of the applicant. As Mr. Bridger said, we were here last month. We heard some comments. We withdrew the application, continued it, carried it. We did give notice that was requested by way of regular mail to the property owners, submitted an affidavit. What we heard last time, we're going to go through tonight, and hopefully it'll be something that the board feels can support a C1 variance on this application. As Mr. Bridger stated, previously we had a two-story proposed addition. That has now been changed to a one-story addition, which is the biggest difference from last time. and the square footage proposed addition has gone from just over 1,700 square feet to approximately 1,050 square feet. So we've reduced the size of the addition, and we've also moved it further back from that side yard setback, increasing the setback. So with that said this evening, we think we're only going to have 2 witnesses, Mr. Falcone, our surveyor, who will bring us around the site specifically, and then our planner, Mr. Kyle, who will testify as to the C1 criteria. I believe they were both sworn in last time. If you want to continue or if you want to re-swear them.
We'll re-swear you. Mr. Falcone?
Should we re-swear everyone in case there's
Sure.
questions for the homeowner and the
Absolutely.
architect? Okay, that's fine.
Absolutely.
Come on, team.
Do you all swear or affirm that your testimony this evening will be truthful? Thank you.
Okay, with that said, we're going to start Mr. Falcone, with Mr. Falcone, who was qualified last time, so he can just continue. Frank, let's mark that. Ms. Casey, do you recall where we were last time on the exhibits?
Yeah, we will begin tonight with A9.
Frank, can you just tell us what you want to refer to that plan as?
Okay, A9 is a rendering of the site plan detail. It's very similar to the one we presented at the original meeting. And what A9 shows, the existing house in brown, existing driveway, and highlighted in yellow are the 2 proposed additions. We have the front porch addition, and as Mr. Spadaccini alluded to, we have this now a 1-story addition behind the garage. The major changes, as Mr. Spadaccini talked about, was this is a 1-story addition now, which reduces the side yard to height ratio variance. The kitchen addition is now behind the garage, and this has been shifted 5.6 feet further over than the previous proposal. The previous was 9.1, now this is 14.7. There was a
And
little...
that's to the edge of the roof overhang?
Yes. And that is to this back corner right here. There was a little confusion in Mr. Bridger's interpretation of the distances off the property line, and I got to take credit for some of that confusion in that it wasn't very clear. And just for clarification, the addition itself is 14.7. There's a outdoor fireplace on the deck, that is 13.1, and then the deck itself is 13.7. It's a little beyond the actual addition. We had proposed a deck on the right side of the property. Before that was 22.1, I believe, and now it is 28.7, so that has been shifted over. With regard to the height ratio, before it was 1.5 to 3.79. It was a very large departure from what is required. Now it is very close to conforming. This roof is only 7 inches higher than allowed. Instead of 1.5 to 1, it's 1.5 to 1.04. So it's very, very close. So that's a major reduction in this area. We still have the stormwater basin. That remained the same. We shifted it back because of the new configuration on the deck. However, that's still 23.5 feet off of the property line. We also have a variance with regard to the 3 air conditioner units on the side. There's really nowhere to put them in the back, and that is 12.1 feet off of the property line.
Have you retained the fence you were talking about?
Yes.
You were talking of a 6-foot fence along that property line?
Yes, and that will remain.
As well as landscaping, Mr. Chairman.
So the air conditioning units are screened
Either by
from
the
the
fence or
neighbor's
landscaping,
property?
but they'll definitely be screened.
Yeah.
Okay, basically, that's the major changes tonight. And the height ratios are all detailed on the plan of, on our sheet 4 of the site plan set.
And the height ratio, Frank, with regard to that little bump out for the stairwell is consistent with the existing height ratio of the garage, correct?
That is correct. Behind the garage, there's a small bump out to accommodate a stairwell to the first floor. That is consistent with the existing roof line, so it doesn't increase the degree of variance from the existing to the proposed. It maintains the same line.
We have nothing further this witness, Mr. Chairman. It's up to you and the board if you have any questions for him. He's not going anywhere, though.
Questions from the board? We
Good.
apparently have no questions.
That's fine. We're going to call our next witness then. I have no questions of our witness, no. Okay. Next, we're going to call Mr. Kyle, our planner, who I believe has appeared before this board recently, correct, Mr. Kyle?
Yes.
We'd like to offer him as a professional planner, as an expert.
As long as his record's, in the record, then we're okay.
I believe so. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I was retained by the applicant to review the variance issues associated with the addition, reviewed the site plans, including the revised plans, the revised architectural drawings that were submitted to the board as well. Visited the site several times, probably 4 or 5 times in total. Reviewed the the municipality's master plan as well as the ordinance, and then assisted in the preparation of some of the exhibits as well. So we've reviewed with the board previously the characteristics of the property. We're in the RA zoning district here. I think we reviewed all the pre-existing non-conforming conditions at the previous meeting, so I won't go through those. And Frank and Mr. Spadaccini have detailed the bulk variances that are required. What I'm going to do is just address these kind of wholesale because they all fit in under the same criteria rather than go individually variance by variance. I think they're all related to the C1 criteria, where the width of the lot in this case is creating a hardship. So this is an undersized lot for the zone. We're at 3.45 acres where 4 is required, but the issue here is that this is a very narrow lot. And if you look at this area of the municipality and this lot and the one immediately next door, and that would be to the left side of A9, these are the 2 narrowest lots in this section of the municipality. So if you look at the zoning map and the tax map on the front cover sheet, you can clearly see that these 2 lots, so this extends to the back. There's an additional lot that's not depicted on this, but either way, we have a narrow lot condition which really creates a hardship in terms of the construction of an addition on this site. So, and it's important to go back to Mr. Fett's testimony at the previous meeting about the nature of the layout of the house existing. We did make some modifications to that, but we want to try to preserve that internal layout as much as possible, and this is really the most feasible way to add the addition to the house. So that's really what creates that. It's the positioning and also the interior layout of the existing dwelling, and then the narrowness of the lot that creates this hardship issue. So I think we can clearly establish the positive criteria on that basis. Now, in terms of the negative criteria and these are all setback variances that we're seeking. We don't have any FAR issues, coverage issues, anything like that on this application. I think the reductions here will not result in substantial impact to the surrounding property. So we heard the comments of the board at the prior meeting. We've gone back and adjusted this. We've moved it about 5.6 feet farther in from where we were before. If you remember, the addition had lined up previously with the 9.1, but we've jogged that in and reduced the height of the addition to a point where it should have really negligible impact on the surrounding property, particularly the lot to the south. The house that's constructed on the adjacent lot, so when you look, that house, when that house was replaced, it was demolished and a new structure was constructed. It was put within the setback, so when you add up the setbacks for that dwelling combined with the setback that we're providing for the addition, we have about 55 feet of separation between there. We'll have a 6-foot fence on the property line. We also talked today, we offered and talked about landscaping at the last meeting, but I think we kind of fleshed that out in a little more detail today. We'll provide some green giant arborvitae along that property line as well in the area of the addition and the air conditioning units. Those, as you may know, are deer resistant. They grow very quick. You'll get 1 foot to 1.5 feet per year out of those, and they don't get snow damage either. So we think that's a good choice to put in there along the property line. Within 3 years, we'll have probably almost full coverage. If we put them in at, roughly 8 feet at time of planting, we would expect that we'll have 10 or 11, 12 feet of screening within 2 to 3 years. So that will tend to also limit the impact of the addition that we have, in combination with the fact that now it's a single-story addition. The pitch on the addition roof is much shallower than what's on the existing garage roof, so we're kind of limiting the impact of that setback ratio variance that we were seeking previously. As we said, we're 1.5 to 1.04 on that, the exception being the stairwell addition. So there was some discussion about the layout, and we've changed that so that the nanny suite is now above the garage, and we've constructed that stairwell as access to that space so that it can be used. So that's where the addition variance comes in for the setback ratio, but we're matching, again, the pitch of the existing garage roof. So there's really no change in that, and it's a fairly minor addition at that. It's not very wide, so probably 3 to 4 feet maximum for the stairwell. The terrace and the deck structures, as Mr. Bridger had noted, we do need setback relief for those. However, these are basically at-grade structures that are being constructed, so the impact would tend to be fairly limited. We have landscape screening that exists on the north side of the property line, so that's to Lot 5 on the right-hand side of A9. And then, as we discussed on the left-hand side of A9, we will have a new 6-foot fence and then additional landscaping there. So again, that will really tend to kind of eliminate or minimize any of that potential impact that we might have from that setback. So I think all told, with that, the condition of the lot and the proposals that we have for mitigation, I think that we can say there's no substantial impact to the surrounding properties from the variances that we're seeking. And obviously, we've done a lot to try to minimize as much as we can within reason any of those departures and the impacts that we're having. Now, in terms of the intent and purpose of the zone plan on the bulk variances, again, there's some obvious intent here. It's not necessarily stated in the master plan of the ordinance, but we all know that setbacks and the height ratio, those are all put in to effectuate protections to light, air, and open space. I think when you look here, you have to balance the fact that we have a condition of the lot that creates a hardship. So we're balancing those. We're trying to mitigate as best we can with this proposal and kind of limit that impact. I think that the changes that we've made here in the specifics of this lot, we've really tried to reduce the impact as much as possible, and again, fighting to try to keep as much light, air, and open space as we can for the neighboring lots, which I think we've achieved here. So I think we can say that there's no substantial impact to the intent of those standards, and again, we've mitigated it as best we can.
Can I ask you a question about the driveway and its entrance to the road?
Certainly.
That driveway is on part of a curved road.
It is. It's on the inside of the curve.
If you're sitting back in the driveway trying to get out, the tree plantings to the north of the driveway really obscure the road. And it seems to me you should plan to have sort of a 45-degree view in both directions.
Sure, that's a good point.
Because in rush hour periods, that road is
that gets very
actually
busy.
quite heavily traveled.
I turned and looked at my client, and they're okay with that. So we'll agree to that.
I think that's
even if you want to make it a condition of approval,
valuable thing to
that's
do.
fine. Certainly.
We can provide an adequate site triangle.
I'm sorry?
We can provide an adequate site triangle at the driveway.
Yes.
We'll work with the township engineer.
Yeah, that's really what it needs. Good, okay.
I think I had a question.
Sure.
You have the deck there. I was wondering why you put the fireplace where you did put it, which is as close to the
That's
property line as...
well, because the kitchen addition, there'll be some doors that kind of accordion out and that opens onto that outdoor space. So the positioning of the fireplace was there because, during points when my clients are entertaining, if they open those doors and have people there, then they can utilize the fireplace, for entertaining purposes. So it was placed there for that reason. And again, that structure, I'm sure you've seen an outdoor fireplace. It's, the box is probably 6 or 7 feet tall. The chimney might extend. It's not like a normal house chimney. It only goes up another probably 6, 7 feet. So and its mass is not very big, so it will kind of tend to be, not seen as much. So I think the impact of that, as far as the setback is concerned, tends to be minimal.
As long as the smoke doesn't go in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's still a pretty good distance away from the adjacent property, so.
Any other questions? Think we've finished in our question.
We have nothing further at this point in
No,
time.
no
I'd just
further people?
be allowed to summarize.
I'll ask for members of the audience who wish to talk. Yes, you'll have to steal the microphone. No, there is a microphone there. And you want to go to the site plan? You'll have to affirm to our attorney that you will speak truthfully as well.
Sir, would you state your name for the record again and your address?
Yes, 364 Cherry Hill Road.
It's Mr. Adewale?
Yes.
Do you swear affirm any testimony you give this evening will be truthful?
Yes.
Thank you.
Remember, we talked about the time that you should use to make your presentation last time.
Okay. Okay, thank you for giving this opportunity to respond to this 374 Cherry Hill Road application. We are the neighbors closest to this property, and I'd just like to kind of give you an overall view of how we feel about this application that's being made, because we are the neighbors who are most impacted by this variance application. So I'd like to go through a few of the details, but more importantly, I'd like to focus on why this application, why this hardship is being claimed, and why it may not be
Can you
appropriate.
speak more into your microphone? I'm finding it.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
That's better.
Okay, sorry. So I'm going to run through a few of the charts that I have, and I'll make a few points, and then obviously I'll make some comments. I've given the copy of this in the handouts, so you'll see this one. Our main point of objection is that to gain this approval, you need to demonstrate unique undue hardship to gain this approval. And our point is, kitchen that the relocation that they are asking for in new application can be redesigned and located within the setback. So there's no need for them to have the kitchen outside the setback line. There is no special need here, meaning that they already have a kitchen, big enough kitchen. The property has 5,500 square feet of living space, so adding another 2,000 square feet is not something that can be considered as a special need. It's only one of those nice to have. By asking for the space, what they are doing is they are creating hardship on us by encroaching on our open space that we are entitled to have that 40 feet of side setback, just like we have given them 40 feet of side setback. So we feel that this is not equitable, and therefore, and furthermore, because it's not a unique hardship, this approval should not be given. So we have negative impact. So
How do we label these things that are being shown to us? That
Well,
should be
we'll call
opponent
them,
one or something?
Yeah, we'll call it objector
I
one.
have,
Well, why don't we call it one, because you're the objector, so instead of A,
it's my one.
oh, it's your one, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
The thing I like to think about is the negative impact on neighbors.
Yeah, you've made that point. We've,
I will try and make this in a way that is more understandable, so please give me time. They come back with a no change in basically setback violation. They still have fairly large setback violation requirement. So nothing much has changed in terms of footprint of the new addition. The issue that we have from the existing setback violation that they have, we have flooding on the property on our side, and it's an eyesore for us with the garage being so close to our property line. So this is really the issue for us. And our point is the board should be safeguarding our interest in approving this application, because we are just as much important as they are in terms of getting this application.
so this is Exhibit 2, is that what it is?
Yeah, we'll call it O2,
Yeah, this is
or
two.
Exhibit O2.
I'll put two here. I just like to highlight, just like to give you a sense of proportion here, because that's important in understanding what our concern is. Here is 364 Cherry Hill Road property line. This is our property line between the two properties. This is our setback line. And their setback line should be here. Their setback line should be here, considering they're 40 feet. So their proposed kitchen is occupying most of the setback. Whether you said 2 feet, 4 feet is a small amount compared to 40 feet of setback that should be. Now, the thing to notice is this kitchen can be relocated inside this envelope within the setback. They have plenty of room. They have plenty of FAR. They have plenty of room that they can extend the kitchen within the setback. There's no need for the setback approval.
So you're suggesting knocking down the garage? Is that the existing garage? Is that what you're...
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm not being funny here. All I'm trying to make it point is existing garage, obviously, is grandfather. I cannot do that.
All right, I understand
So,
where your lines are.
So what I'm trying to make the point is the new structure should not be allowed on the basis that the existing structure exists. Now let me illustrate the real hardship that we have.
Will be 03.
Yeah, this is 3. This will be 3.
It
We'll
has
put it
what
on.
on that?
I'm sorry?
It needs a 3 on that piece of paper.
I can't hear you.
You have to mark
Oh, okay.
each of your
Thank you.
presentation pieces separately, and that one should be 3.
Okay, my
And
C
the
is 3.
previous one should be 2.
That's fine.
But you didn't put either of those numbers on.
I'm sorry, I'm not used to this kind of dog and pony shows, sir.
Okay, fine. Keep going.
Let me highlight the flooding hardship that we have now. Here are the recent pictures from the recent rain that happened. Here's 374, and here's 364 Cherry Hill. You can see the flooding coming from 374 to 364. And if you look at the source of that flooding, 374 garage is where the flooding is starting and moving into the 364. So the existing garage that was approved way back as on the property line, on the setback line, it has lost the impervious space, and we are suffering from that. So by adding another big structure on the same side will cause flooding more problem to us. Plus it's an eyesore. This garage, imagine you have a beautiful long property on your side and you're walking along in your property and what you're seeing next door is a garage wall just 2 feet away from you. Can you imagine that? Now, imagine living like that every day, every night, and every day out. So it's, putting this kind of new structure along another 40 feet, another 50 feet back is not really a fair way to do, treat us on the basis that, whereas we have given them 40 feet, because we came to the board for the same application, for the same requirement, and we were told we cannot have even 2 feet of violation. And here we are talking about 30 feet, 35 feet of violation. And still there is no question of, whether there is a real hardship. My argument is there's no real hardship here. And it would be unfair to us by approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this case? No. I see nobody else who wishes to speak to the case, so maybe you want to make a summary?
I will, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to address a few things. With regard to the water, I'd like to point out a couple things. The date of the photo was one of the most recent torrential downpours that we've had, but despite that, we are putting in a new stormwater basin, as you can see from the application, that will enhance the situation, not make it worse. So it will be an enhancement, and we'll address exactly that situation. Mr. Falcone can certainly address it if you have any questions of him. We're happy to address any questions that the board may have with
Yes,
regard
well,
to
in general, the board would expect you not to allow water from your property to go
It's
into
against the law
neighbor's
to let
property,
water
but
flow onto anyone
If
else's.
we have 10 feet of rain,
Um,
there's not much you can do.
No, that's exactly right. And as all of you know, it's against the law to run stormwater onto someone else's property. So I think I learned that day one of law school. But in any event, with that said, and the other thing that I'm hearing a little bit, and I understand the neighbor has concerns and the like, but as all of you know, each application stands on its own. And it seems as I'm hearing more and more that the neighbor had an application that may have been revised, denied, et cetera. And I just remind the board to please, look at our application on its own 2 legs, if you will. So with that said, very briefly, I'm going to summarize. As you know, the criteria for a C1 variance, exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of specific piece of property, which Mr. Falcone and Mr. Kyle have both testified to, exceptional situation affecting a piece of property or the structure located thereon that's already there. We already encroach on that side yard setback. We're making it better than that, but we are running the line. And the case law out there is that that is generally acceptable to hold that line, and we're increasing the setback, so we're not even holding it. So we've listened to what the board suggested. We've done that. As far as the negative criteria goes, there is no substantial detriment in this situation, as Mr. Kyle testified to. And again, with regard to any stormwater runoff, we think we're going to improve the situation. We're certainly not going to make it worse. And again, we don't even think there really is a situation, but nonetheless, we are going to improve the situation. So with all that said, kindly request that the board consider this C1 hardship request and approve the variances requested.
Thank you.
A question?
Sure.
Will the garage downspouts be incorporated into your stormwater management system?
Yes, the plans depict alongside the left property line all the way to the front of the house that the downspouts will be picked up and put into the, conveyed to the stormwater management system in the rear. So if anything, it's going to be an improvement because water that's running off of the existing garage now is not being picked up. So we're going to pick up that and the proposed addition. So there should be a reduction on that side.
I'm sorry, what are you talking?
Yeah, the flooding from the garage. The flooding from the garage
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to be difficult, but
No,
the public, the public portion is.
If you have a point, make it quickly.
I'm sorry?
Well,
Yeah,
you're standing up with a microphone. Say
Yeah.
something,
yeah, I will do that, you know.
but I'm not going to allow you 10 minutes again.
You know, the point about the flooding from the, from the neighbor's property is, if you think about it, what's happening now is with the garage being where it is, the garage is on the 40 feet setback line. So with all the traffic on the driveway, the area is supposed to remain impervious, has now become very tight. So the runoff from,
No, that's enough. I understand your point, fine.
so
That's enough, please.
So no, my point is, with respect, this is what happens when you approve this kind of side setback violation. Over time, this kind of negative impact begins to appear. So you have to think through further down the line why these things may look okay now, but maybe not look okay afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll go into executive session at this point. Do you have a question? Of course.
Because it is glaring. Regarding these pictures of the flooding, the water, is this, all this water generated from the applicant's property? You know, speak to the topography and
What you're looking at, is
You know,
that the question?
yeah.
So the one photo, let's see. So they're here now. So this photo is actually our front yard. That's our front yard without a doubt. And Elmy has been sworn in, she's one of the applicants. Elmy, give me an idea of where that.
This is Mr. Wallace's yard here. I'm sorry. This is Mr. Atawalla's yard, front yard. And if you look at this area of the garage, this water here does not seem to be sourced from our yard. It definitely is on Mr. Atawalla's yard. You cannot see a pool of water in any of these areas. You see some reflection, but there's certainly no standing water on 374 in the front yard.
Yeah.
So
In
can,
general,
well, hold on.
sorry.
So can Mr. Falcone speak to that too?
Yeah, of course.
He's your expert, yeah.
Of course.
Because that's my main
No,
question.
as
It's-
it should be. We have no problem answering those questions.
Going back to Exhibit A9, the topography is such that the natural flow comes from I'm going to call it the northwest corner, and it does pull right towards Mr. Atawalla's house. It's that way now. It'd be very difficult to change that pattern unless some major storm drains were put on and conveyed to the back. Basically, our point is where the additions are going, that will be picked up. We show roof leaders that convey the water back to the stormwater basin, and we also come on this side and pull that towards the basin. There's not much we can do with the direction of this flow here. That's the natural progression, that's the natural topography.
And that is, Mr. Falcone, if I may, Mr. Falcone, that is the natural topography not being created by anything, any dwelling that's currently on the structure, simply the natural flow of water.
That is correct. That drainage pattern was there before this house was built. So it would be very difficult without some substantial stormwater system placed in there to cut this off and convey it to the rear.
Thank you.
The point there is, if they didn't have the garage, see, my point is, by getting the previous approval for this garage here, they had to have this kind of driveway here. If they didn't have this driveway, you'll have natural surface, just like the surface that we have. And the water will absorb through the natural drainage. So what's happening now is most of the water is coming here and all this driveway is, and obviously there's a overall grading that makes the water go towards us. But the amount of water is rushing now. And I have a video actually, I can send a video also to you. Yeah, and when you look at the video, you will see the amount of water that's coming in. So now I'm having to spend money to take care of this drainage problem that I have. Whereas I've given them 40 feet of separation. And here I'm suffering from their garage, and furthermore, I'll be suffering from this, so close new extension.
Thank you.
If I could just respond, in looking at the topography, we would be willing to create a swale in here to keep the water between the property line and the house. We could bring a swale up in this direction, which would pick up probably approximately half of the water that's going there now. So that would be an even further mitigation of that. But we would look into that.
Yeah. I mean, in general, we condition a variance that we give to say that water from your property should not go on to neighboring properties, because that is a problem in Princeton anyway. Okay. So, are we ready to try and consider this in executive session? Any comments to each other about it? I guess from my viewpoint, the changes that have been made have been in at least the right direction, whether or not we think they're adequate, but I think they've attempted to deal with issues that we raised. I think the question of water, in fact, our engineer will be able to give real-time advice about. That's his responsibility for the building process. I will make my other normal complaint. One of the things that one does when one buys a house here is to want to be able to look at the stars, and so any exterior lighting that you put up must be such that the light source is shielded and can't be seen from off your property, and that there's no light spillage from whatever light sources you use over your property line. That again is one of the Royce conventional complaints, because I suffer from a neighbor who has lights on.
We can certainly handle that, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
I appreciate
Any other comments by us?
I have,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay. You didn't see.
No,
We're
well, that's
looking
the
that
problem. Go with it.
I do appreciate the fact that it is lower and farther from the property line. I guess I'd be happier, we don't really concern ourselves with what goes on within the building. What we're concerned with is, the property lines and how the building lines up to that. And I would be happier with it if it weren't, even though the garage is already there and it's back a bit from where it had been, I would be happier, frankly, if it were not another block of the house that's close to the property line that hadn't been there before. I just think that's something that we can't ignore. We may decide to accept it, but it isn't, it's a change, but it's not as good as it could be.
Yeah. Anyone else with comment?
No, but I appreciate the fact that they kind of reconfigured. I mean, you moved the kitchen to the other side, and you reconfigured the height to accommodate that extra 6 feet setback. So, I mean, I thought you did a fantastic job of reconfiguring it from that standpoint. So, I think it's a garage wasn't already there, it would be another issue, but since the garage is already there, it seems logical that it would go back, so.
Does anyone else want to make any comments to us? If not, I guess I would then like a motion and a seconder to the motion.
Board members, there are two conditions in Mr. Bridger's memo that he recommends be imposed if the board decides they want to approve the application. So if there is a motion to approve, I would suggest that they incorporate Mr. Bridger's recommendations, one which is that a flat permit should be submitted confirming the properties owner occupied, and two, that there are two lots here and they need to be consolidated.
Oh, it is two lots, isn't it?
It is.
Yes,
It is. They're
okay.
considered
The
merged for zoning.
consolidating of the
Yep.
lots
Yep.
makes eminently good sense.
And the owner occupied
Yeah.
issue.
The other one is that the applicant should submit a flat permit because part of what they're proposing is a flat for the nanny. So Mr. Bridger would like an application submitted for that, which confirms that the property is going to be owner occupied and that they acknowledge that that's the case.
Yeah, okay. So the flat is only usable if the owner is occupying the building? Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, it becomes a duplex.
No, I can't imagine that that's what the board would think they were approving, so
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay. With those additions to the conditions, do we have a motion, one way or the other?
I'll make a motion to approve it as a C1.
Two,
Approve it as a C1,
as
C1
Condition.
hardship, narrow lot,
yeah,
so forth.
okay. Is there a seconder to that motion? I'll second. So we have a seconder. Do we need any further discussion of the motion? If not, Madam Attorney, if you would be kind enough to call the roll.
Since we have certain members who weren't here for the first hearing on this application, I'm going to call on those members who were here for both meetings, both the first one and the second. So that would be Mr. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Davidge,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Ms. Coulson,
No,
okay. Ms. Lambrose,
Yes.
Chairman Royce.
Yeah,
Then this application is approved.
Thank you
have
very
an
much,
option
Mr.
to
Chairman, members of the board.
This is the day of discrimination. I've never seen such a mockery of. Thank you very much.
thank you. Where are we? So that's, I've now lost my agenda. Here it is. Okay. So this one has gone through. So the next case, which is Z1818, is 246 Valley Road.
Mr. Chairman, before we begin on the next application, do you want to address, there are two applications tonight. One is being pulled from the agenda, 3.5 Madison. That requires renoticing. So if there's anybody here tonight who came for that application, we want you to
This is
know.
the Lytle Street one.
No, there's another one too. 3.5 Madison, which would have been the third application tonight, that application is going to have to be renoticed, so that will not be heard tonight. So if there's anybody in the audience.
So that's the Madison Street one. you're
Yep.
talking about.
And then the other one is 31 Lytle Street.
And 31 Lytle, we're going to carry until the 24th of October.
Correct, the noticing
And
is,
renoticing will be required. Huh?
well, actually, the noticing is in order, so what the
I mean,
applicant,
we
has-
haven't accepted the case.
well, what the applicant has asked, and,
That we accept the case?
correct, that you
And then
take
they just
jurisdiction,
notify by ordinary mail.
correct,
Okay,
all right.
I think that's fine. There's no objection to that. All right. So, we're doing now 246 Valley Road, the Z1818-616. And what I will do is to ask Mr. Bridger to, assuming that everything is okay with the paperwork, to read the essence of his memorandum to the board.
I don't have a memorandum. I had received no plans. I did not know they were appearing at the hearing tonight until I came and saw them setting up. No, sir.
Are there revised drawings to this? Derek? Are there revised drawings to this?
What's that?
Are there revisions to the application?
I have no idea. I haven't seen or talked to him since we were here a month ago.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm the phone. Last time I called, officer asked me to bring my architect here. I didn't know it was some anything. Last time asked me what's the relation between my new addition room with my old house. Now my architect to drawing this one, he can explain to here. I have the 13 copies for each one.
Ms. Liu, we need to swear you in again tonight. You swear affirm any testimony you give this evening will be truthful. Thank you.
Derek, can we accept information at the hearing like this without it going to the public or being available?
Board members, honestly, since the zoning officer and the staff has had no opportunity to review any of this, you may want to consider telling the applicant this thing's going to have to be carried again, because no one, neither staff nor engineering, no one has seen what's being distributed right now, so I don't think Mr. Bridger's going to be in a position to comment about it. And of course, that's true. No one in the public has seen it because it wasn't made available until tonight.
Excuse me, last time, someone said you have to submit the plan. I have plenty of time because I asked me only during my architecture to this plan. What's the relation, communication with my new addition to older house? So I definitely, before I can, give it to you this plan, but then just I bring my architecture here. Last time you asked me to just I did here. So before I explain already, I have new addition first floor. I got a permission and approved permit. I did finish my foundation as well. It's finished already, and the township will pass the inspection. Why change? Because I want to add the second floor, and then the zoning board is bringing here to explain why, because my setbacks not good enough for the baking food. But my first permission is approved already, setback 9 foot already. So, and the last time the board officer asked me what's communication, how can from my addition to my house. I said to the basement steps. And then I explained, you said you can't explain clear, can you bring your architecture here? So this David, my senior, my architect.
Well, before we progress on this, what would the board like to do? Do you want to continue to hear the application this evening? Do you want to carry it to allow the
We
staff.
were concerned that this was becoming a duplex rather than a house
Correct,
with an additional space.
that's correct.
And one of the major concerns was that there was no obvious, what I would call reasonable entry from the old house into the new addition.
That's true.
And at that time, we asked, I believe, that we be shown appropriate drawings or have explained to us how these two things are connected so that it isn't a duplex and does fall under the owner-occupied, sort of
Correct.
system. So I would think it had no people wishing to address it last time. Maybe if we can hear this and it's obvious, then we can bring it to an end now, unless the zoning officer and the engineers feel that that was a totally inappropriate thing to do.
I just haven't had a chance to review the plans. I mean, I'm looking at the basement floor plan. There's 2 full baths in the basement. There's, I guess, another full bath on the first floor for a 3-bedroom house, and then there's the addition in the back with another full bathroom. I don't know. I mean, I guess this use of the property is, what is it? I mean, it's,
No.
So this is 2-bedroom house, okay? I had, yes, 2-bedroom. I add additional room for 3-bedroom. Before the 2-bedroom house, I don't have the dining room, I only have the living room. And then I have the 3 bath and the first floor look white and the basement have the 2. For that existing condition. For the new addition, I just add 1 bedroom for the 2nd floor. And the first floor is for activity room.
It sure looks like 2 units. It looks like 2 separate units. I mean, the way the connection is between them and what you've got in this addition.
Okay, sir, do you want to identify yourself for the record?
I'm Dave Singer, architect, 44 Federal Twist Road, Stockton.
All right, and Mr. Singer, you're licensed in the state of New Jersey?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I presented before this board on a few occasions. Yes, ma'am.
So maybe you can explain the plans that we find puzzling.
So currently there are 2 bedrooms upstairs and there's living space downstairs, but there's no legal bedroom downstairs since there's the exit through the existing areaway which leads up to the addition which was approved in 2015.
Can you speak into a microphone so that
Yes.
we can record you?
Yes, so there was the rear addition was approved in 2015, according to this document that I was given by the owner. The house has a full basement with an areaway stair that is connected to the rear addition and an internal stair, which is central to the plan, dividing it into 4 quadrants. The kitchen is adjacent to and over top of the bottom landing of the areaway stair. The 2 bedrooms are on the left-hand side of the plan, and the living room is the front right corner. Currently, the back room is being used for storage, and it's my understanding that the owner wants to have an in-law suite, and the in-laws would probably move into the main building since it's fairly on grade. There's only a few steps up, and the people who can manage the stairs up to the loft would take the new addition. So there's living space on the ground floor, along with a shared laundry. And the loft space, the second floor space, which we're proposing to add, contains a closet, a bedroom, and a bath, as well as a stairway. And so we have a condition where the site obviously lends itself to an addition, but functionally, the way the house is laid out, you would lose a bedroom or both in order to have communication, effective communication. So communicating through the basement is not unheard of. I've been in several houses where the garage, the only connection from the attached garage of a 50s rancher was to go through the basement and traverse the entire basement to take the second stair up to the kitchen. So this was in Mountainside. But so, you know, to have a basement connection to living space where there really isn't very much living space on the main floor, while unusual, if it meets my client's needs, I'm here to help them fulfill their dreams. Because if we don't dream,
So why all of the
we don't dream, we really don't have anything, do we? So, you know, you did approve the ground floor addition.
We did, no.
It was a little
Wait,
bit.
The ground floor addition was approved via variance many years
Right,
ago.
yes, correct.
And then reconstructed to the exact approval at that time, although they never did it, so.
Okay, well, that's fine. No, you're correct. I'm just saying that it was amenable at one point to do
Well, I mean,
this. And in order to keep the site as open and airy for the neighborhood as possible, I mean, the house across the street sprawls, literally sprawls across the whole lot to get as much interior space as possible. I mean, this is a fairly modest addition. It has a sort of a interesting sort of farmhouse sort of look to it, I don't know. But it is in the back. It's not something that you would readily see from the street.
Couldn't the
It really has a
connection be
minor
through the...
impact, but I mean, it's up to you folks. If you don't like my client, fine. I mean,
It has nothing to do with
Doesn't
whether we
like
like your
your
client
well,
or not.
we're talking about how the interior functions, and
Why couldn't
frankly,
you?
I don't know why the previous application
Let's try and be a little bit
couldn't, I mean, that was
focused in our
something that was
comment.
off the table for the previous application, and here we are, something very modest. We have no one speaking out against it, and then we're getting a lot of pushback. That's fine. That's your prerogative.
My foundation finished already and finished in 2017, got approved. I didn't say don't do anything. I used the first permit, and here's this one.
It's not on. Green light should be on there. There you go.
So I finished the foundation, it's approved, finished in 2017. Then I started to do, build the house up because they said I have to finish the foundation. A foundation is done. Then I said I have the second floor because in the beginning, I didn't know the first one floor not enough. Because of my family situation changed, I remarried. My husband is 75. He need to leave the Princeton. My daughter married and pregnant, and then we have the baby. My current house, only 2-bedroom house, definitely not enough for a big family. That's why I want at the second floor. They said, even at the second floor, you have to still come back zoning again. I said, I have a zoning already before. I just wanted at the second floor because I didn't do anything, just high up. So now come back, they ask me question, how can I get from my main house to my addition? I said, if I have the way to open the door for my kitchen room, I will. But look at the diagram. My kitchen is too tiny. If I open the door to my new addition, I lost either the sink or fridge or stove. So there's no way I can open the door to my new addition. If I open the door from my bedroom, I lost not one bedroom. So only way I can do through my basement to my new addition. Like you said, I'm the new immigrant. I pursue my dream. I own this land property. So if I did through all procedure, everything's by step, because this only thing I slow down because family things happen. If a family, see, because remember, my husband is 75, he cannot drive the car. We live in West Windsor, it's like a rural area. So he cannot drive the car, but he only can come here back to Princeton, to live in Princeton. Before it's a rental property, I agree, so something like I said, but then I want to move back. I have the right because it's convenient for my husband, because he's 75, he needs to leave the town, he cannot drive the car, go anywhere. So my daughter married in June, she pregnant, then I have the grandkid. Also my husband have the grandkids, two son and the grandkid from England. They will be with us for quite often. I don't have any space to live.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Singer, the idea of having this addition, it seems like it doesn't really flow with the look of the house. Was there a reason why it was designed this way to?
The house is very low
I understand
slung.
she needs more room. We understand
Yeah,
that.
I mean, the house is very low slung, and really there's not a lot of budget to work with, and trying to create any sort of meaningful connection is going to really put us into the front yard, and that's another. All we have is the side yard, and that's where the bedrooms are. So we've got to reorganize, it's basically reorganize the whole house, and then it's a big project because we've got to dig foundations and everything, whereas we have an addition in the back that really isn't fulfilled its functional promise, let's say. When she conceived it, she had one idea. Her family situation has changed, and she wants to have more of a mother-daughter, I guess, rather than in-law suite. It sounds like a mother-daughter. And those things, when you look at them functionally, they're often, it's nice to have people gather into the kitchen, but a lot of times people want to have a little privacy for their own family time and be able to come together at special times or at certain times, but other times they want to be separate and live their lives that way. And I see that a lot. I do a lot of additions for in-laws and for mother-daughter. And frankly, the needs are pretty close to the same. If they have the space to do it, they like to have a common space to attach to. I think in this case it's in the basement, and it certainly works the best because it's off the driveway. Everyone can come and go. If they want to come into the kitchen and say hello, they can come into the kitchen. And it's just 2 steps around the corner and they can go into the apartment, or they can go downstairs and go through the basement if it's raining out. So, functionally, I can't really fault it that much. Yes, it's unusual to go through the basement, but I've been in worse houses that were purposely built, without the need for variances, and like the house in Mountainside I described. Perfectly nice house, but the garage was next to the study and a bedroom, and it was narrow, so there was no connection. The only connection was down to the basement, a very similar situation where you had an areaway that was within the basement itself, and you had to traverse the basement to get up to the kitchen with all your groceries. And I'm sure the wife really enjoyed that, but they lived with it. And yes, it is 2 houses, and maybe she needs a flat. Maybe you want to have her apply for it as a flat in case.
She doesn't have the parking for a flat. Is there going to be another kitchen? There was a kitchen in the earlier iteration.
We're not doing another kitchen.
Your earlier submission, I believe there was a kitchen, right?
No.
I don't think so.
No?
No,
I don't
it's a small
recall.
bar, no kitchen.
Bar.
The bar is
Yeah.
small.
And how many
just
bedrooms is the new house going to have?
2 to 3.
And
Three.
5 bathrooms, 5 full bathrooms?
No 5 bathrooms.
There's 2 in the basement, there's 1 on the first floor, there's 2 in the new addition, correct?
That's before the rental property I put it there, and but then the new additions, the half and the full on the upstairs.
I mean, the bathrooms in the basement were there, and we can take one out, I guess. if you want.
I'm just trying to
I mean,
figure
the
out what the use
bathrooms
of the
don't
property
necessarily-
is.
I mean,
Just-
if you're taxing people, you tax them on bedrooms, not bathrooms. You can really have a
No,
bathroom.
they
No, it's the
increased my
use of the
tax too.
property.
They did. They did increase the tax too.
Yeah,
for
well,
my-
but I'm just saying,
It does seem like
there's no
an
limit to the number of
excessive amount
bathrooms
of
you can
bathrooms
have.
and bars and even laundry facilities for,
Well, there's one laundry that we put in the addition, so it's right at the front, right at the
aren't
entrance
there,
door.
there's one in the basement, and there's something called laundry on the first floor. And I mean, it's kind of hard to follow this. I'm really sorry that Mr. Bridger didn't get a chance to review it, wasn't given a chance to review it in advance of 10 minutes ago. Because I'm not as, I think he has a better handle on it, and he would have been able to
Just see-
provide us with some commentary, which is always useful to us.
Can you see why I put that one? If I have a guest, my daughter come home to live, they have to through, if I'm going down for the laundry, they have to run in through the different bathroom and go into laundry. That's why I put the very compatible just for the corner. And then for my guests using, the guests overnight sleep here, they want to wash those clothes, they come to inside, you have to make a bigger circle. That's the reason I put it there.
So it's 2 units or one?
No. To have the mother-in-law, the unit, my daughter come back to live, my son-in-law come back.
Would we not be better off if we had a chance for Mr. Bridger to take a look at this in,
I think that we don't have enough information here.
There's no site plan either.
Yeah, it's a little hard to read the site
I actually
plan
think that,
and see
I'm
the
sorry,
setbacks
please go
and
ahead.
everything. Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, it's a little hard to understand the site, but the site plan and the setbacks, it's tiny on the,
In my opinion, if you would like us to approve this evening, I would be prone and almost absolutely certain to vote no. I think you've done a disservice to yourself, and I think you've done a disservice to us by presenting it in this manner. So if you want to proceed, by all means, it's your prerogative. But if I were you, I would have Mr. Bridger review it and then come back before this board so that it was done in a better manner. But again, ma'am, it's entirely up to you, and please do as you see fit.
So, okay, I can come next time, so you got all my documents, the whole floor, whole house plan,
Excuse me, ma'am, I don't think it's necessarily, I'll leave it to our attorney to determine, and the scheduling people to figure out when you can next appear here. This really is not a matter of convenience for everybody. It's a time, and there are other people that have submitted applications way in advance. So obviously, we'll look at the scheduling calendar. I don't know for certain whether we as a board can grant you to be able to come here next time or not.
Board members, I'm advised by Mr. Bridger and our board secretary that next month is totally booked in terms of room on an agenda, so the next opportunity would be November 14.
You know, I think when you come back, we need what I would call a proper proposal. From what you've said this evening, I am no wiser than I was looking at the original document a month ago or whenever. And the things I thought we had asked to be brought out more clearly don't seem to have been done so. So coming back and saying the same things with different words isn't going to be helpful. I think the real issue is, what is this that we are building here? Is it a duplex, or is it not? And
Sir,
the number of bathrooms and the number of various odds and ends make me very worried.
I mean, at the previous meeting, we discussed a flat, briefly. Maybe you'll listen to me, that you need extra parking for the flat. That was the problem. It's not accommodated on the right side of the property. I mean, if you want a flat, then they're permitted, but if you want to, I'm just saying they are permitted, but you'd have to redesign your site plan to make it work.
Yeah. So we're going to carry this until some later date? Is that
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as we give it a date certain, the applicant does not have to renotice, because tonight we're announcing that it's being carried to November 14, if that's what the board would like to do.
So what do we need next time? To bring anything, so this plan is not enough, so it not. And the last time they asked me to bring the architect explain what's the communication from my new addition to my basement, to my old house. I explained that I can't open any door from my old house. The only way I can through from my basement to my new addition. Do you think any township have any code said I cannot through my basement to my new addition? And they maybe request why have too many bathrooms. Like I said before, this is a rental property before. I lived in West Windsor. But now the things change because my situation changed. Because my husband is old, 18 years older than me, he's 75. He needs to access convenience store, everything, public library. In West Windsor, this rural area, everything he had to drive the car. He could not drive the car. I work every day, and no one can ride. So only the weekend I can take him going to buy shopping, do something. So that situation changed until you said why you cannot approve me because I threw basement to my new addition. So anything wrong, can you prove the code said I can't do it? Otherwise, I'm the owner of the property. I pursue my right and the happiness and the rightness do things if not break the law. I didn't do any break the law. My neighbor, no one rejected me. Everyone supported me. No problem, my close neighbor. Why you here give me a hard time, say I cannot do this? So please bring the code said you're not allowed because through your basement come to my new addition. Because why can't I have the multiple bathroom? Because existing condition is there. Because I have the rental property. Now I want to move back to live there. So we said I can't move back to live my Princeton house. I have to stay the small 2-bedroom house. I have the bigger family. Please, just bring your heart. Because I'm really like a blue collar worker, only work myself. I don't have enough money. Definitely, if I have the money, I put the second floor. I don't have to question you everyone here. Do you understand? And then you have no problem, or put another side. But I spent the money already. I finished my foundation for my addition. It's ready there. Do you want me to bear the money, throw the money in the drain? And this is not fair to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So the next case is 338 Nassau Street, which is case number Z1818-566, and this is the Michael Graves estate.
Can we take a 5-minute break, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry?
Over here.
Oh,
Can we take a 5-minute break while they're setting up?
yes, why not?
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break before we hear this case.
Yep. Yep, let me just, you want to sit here? I'll sit there. Yep, or just the arrow. You can hit the arrow key. You can take it out of presentation view if that's helpful. You're looking extremely documented. Which one?
It's a crazy world. I listened to Donald Trump making his power in a bit thing. Maybe that's what, it's not a full moon.
It is, the harvest moon was
Is it
yesterday.
the harvest moon?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem. Okay.
I don't know what we do about that other application. I don't think you have any choice but to approve it.
Let me see, what are we?
How can you not? You're basically saying to
We
the
want
lion to,
338.
right?
Okay.
How do,
Oh, I know. Yes, all right. Are we ready? The machine's working? Okay.
Our planner for this case is Chris Cosenza from Looney Rick's Kiss. He will be doing the overview memo, and then I believe Elizabeth Kim will touch on some of the historic preservation requirements or conditions of their approval. So,
Okay, so we'll start again then. So this is 338 Nassau Street, if I understand it properly?
I'll note for the record that the noticing is in order. The board has jurisdiction, and since we have Mr. West And Ms. Kim and Mr. Costanza, if you would all raise your right hand, we'll swear you in. Do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Chris Cosenza. I'm with the architecture and planning design firm, Looney Ricks Kiss. So I've been appointed the...
Can you turn your microphone in or speak into it?
Sure. I am the board planner for the remainder of the year, and I did the application review for this application. So the subject site is located on the north side of Nassau Street, New Jersey State Route 27, about 56 feet west of North Harrison Street, 1 block over. The property is rectangular in shape and contains a 2-story frame dwelling, as well as a 2-story rear addition. On the right side of the building is a gravel driveway leading to a gravel parking lot. Surrounding the property are office uses to the east, north, and to the south, and there is residential uses to the west, which front on Evelyn Place. The applicant's proposal tonight is to seek approval from this board a D3 conditional use variance, minor site plan, and bulk variances to demolish the rear 2-story addition and replace it with a new 3-story rear addition, which will be about 2,400 square feet larger than the previous current addition, and there will be also some site improvements related to landscaping, fencing, lighting, and access. The main portion of the existing structure will remain, actually the portion that's on the screen before you, that portion that fronts on Nassau Street will remain and otherwise be, the interior will be renovated. Ultimately, the development will have over 4,400 square feet of office space along with 2 studio apartments, 550 square feet each, approximate, on the 3rd floor of the 3-story addition in the rear, and in total there will be over 5,500 square feet of floor area. Now in terms of massing, the existing structure is about 2.5 stories, 30 feet in height. The rear addition will be taller, 5 feet taller, 3 stories, 35 feet in height, conforming. And there will be a side entry, double door entry on the side of the addition, which you can't really see from the street. And the windows pattern, the fenestration pattern, will be similar to the structure, the existing structure that will remain. As for the layout of the addition, it will be a central hall corridor with circulation and restrooms in the rear and open spaces on the sides on each floor. The 1st and 2nd floor office space, and the 3rd floor are the 2 studio apartments. Now, the structure that is, the replacement structure, the addition, is a little bit larger in footprint, which pushes the parking lot in the rear back closer to the rear lot line, and that squeezes the shallow setbacks even further. And there is some concern that we've been raised in our reports. There's some shallow backup space when you exit out from these spaces. So there's a little bit of tightness there, which I'll go into in a few minutes. The parking lot will remain in gravel and contain 13 spaces. It currently is 14, so it will be brought down to 13. And there will be a small refuse enclosure back in the right rear corner, which is at the terminus of the existing driveway. And the driveway will actually be better defined and narrowed to 14 and eventually 12 feet in width at the street. And there will also be improvements to the fencing, lighting, and landscaping. The zoning officer and land use engineer provided in their report a history of the site, and I'll just touch up on a couple of those applications, just to kind of just briefly go into why we're here. The applicant previously received a conditional use variance approval back in 1988. The approval was granted to permit was essentially what you see today as a mixed-use building with offices on the main floor and 2-bedroom apartments. Two-bedroom apartments, one on each floor of the rear addition. In 1993, approval was granted to carve out about 200 square feet of the office space in the foremost portion of the existing structure that remains for retail, which received the use variance. There was a number of conditions to that approval in 1993, which was that the retail use not run with the land but be limited to ownership. In 2000, approval was granted to convert the 2 apartments. This, again, we're talking about the existing 2-bedroom apartments. That approval in 2000 converted that residential use into office space with a specific condition that before the property was sold by the applicant or to any other person or corporation, the residential units be restored to function as two separate residential units, and the internal stairway and door between the upstairs units and the upstairs office space be removed. Now, for tonight's application, it's not exactly going to be compliant with that condition. So as such, the applicant requires a D3 variance. They're modifying the D3 conditional use approval from 2000 and prior to that, and even without considering that, the application still does not comply with the two use standards for the joint occupancy use in this zone. So in terms of planning review, with respect to the D3 variance, the applicant should be prepared to provide testimony which enables the board to specifically find that the granting of the requested variance is based upon special reasons which carry out the purposes of zoning, or that undue hardship exists for this particular property, and must also demonstrate that the requested variances can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the master plan and the zoning ordinance. Now, given this is a conditional use variance, essentially this is a use that is permitted, but there are certain conditions that require it as of right. So normally, if they comply, we go to the planning board and just be a conditional use application with no use variance. However, the application does not comply with either one of the two standards, and that's why they're here tonight. But because it is a use that is essentially permitted, there is actually a relaxed standard approved as established in the Coventry Square application. And in this case, this is actually a less, the applicant and the board can rely on less stringent standard approved to address the positive criteria. And it can be established if the applicant can demonstrate that the site continues to be an appropriate site for conditional use, notwithstanding the minor deviations from one or more of the conditions as required for the ordinance. In this case, it's both conditions of the ordinance. That was the positive criteria. As to the negative criteria, the courts have also held that there is a relaxed standard with that as well, and the board should focus on whether reasonable conditions can be imposed in its approval to ensure that the deviations from the conditional use requirements can be satisfied. It should be noted, as you can tell through the history of the application provided by the zoning officer and the land use engineer, the board has previously approved similar deviations in the past. And the issue we have here is that the applicant is actually trying to comply with the ordinance by putting the residential use back in, but not in a format that is exactly consistent with the prior approval. And the other matter would be it still doesn't comply with the two use standards of the ordinance. So with that said, the analysis can be confined to reconciling the deviations from the prior approval with this application. And the board is charged with analyzing these deviations in order to assess what relief, if any, could be granted. The zoning officer and the land use engineer have identified a number of bulk variances in their report, and in that case, the applicant should provide testimony under either the C1 or the C2 criteria. And that is really the end of my planning report, and I can go into the site plan comments if you wish for me to continue.
Not at the moment. Let's
Okay.
see where we go.
Put a point of clarification out there. I think in my memo I wrote that the initial approval had two two-bedroom apartments that were to be restored. It's actually one one-bedroom apartment and one two-bedroom apartment being restored by the two efficiencies that they're proposing now. So.
I'm done with the planning testimony regarding to the variances. And you want me to hold off on the site plan comments for the time being, or do you want me to continue?
I didn't hear what you were asking.
So I finished the planning review with respect to the D3 and the bulk variances. So the question is, would you like me to continue with the review memo with respect to the site plan design and? No, okay.
I'm still confused.
He had some more comments on the site plan. He went through the planning testimony on the variances, the use variances, and the bulk.
Well, if you have comments on the site plan, yes.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
sorry. I misunderstood what you
Sure, sorry. So in my report, I provided a series of comments, just requests for clarifications, really, and I will touch up on a few of them. Regarding the apron along the Nassau Street right-of-way, right now I believe it's gravel, and there's a little dip causing some ponding. The land use engineer and zoning officer requested that this be replaced with a concrete apron. The number of parking spaces, the ordinance requires 15 between the joint occupancy uses. Applicants proposing 13, and of which 5 are actually compact spaces along the rear of the building, and there's 1 van accessible handicap parking space. And it should be noted that in the application materials provided by the applicant, that the applicant proposes to reserve 2 of the spaces for the 2 residential uses, such that they are restricted from on-site parking during the day. And the one comment I wanted to add was that given that the proposed mix of uses and the proximity to the downtown area and mass transit, this is an opportunity to consider reducing the number of required parking spaces from 15 to a number that the board would find agreeable. I think 13 is certainly acceptable, and it could be reduced further. Regarding the parking lot layout, as we discussed, there was a gravel parking lot which will remain, and there are some shallow setbacks and shallow backup space when you maneuver the car through the parking lot. It's a little tight back there. So one of the issues that the zoning officer and the land use engineer have noted in their report was that the parking lot has apparently expanded over the years without approval, and the continued use of the gravel still remains a concern. It's actually mentioned in the 1990 approval as the condition number 1 regarding the trying to prevent migration of gravel onto the setback areas and neighboring yards. To address the issues with the parking lot being expanded, some consideration should be made regarding providing stormwater management, as well as considering reducing the size of the addition and increasing the setbacks so they have a more of a proper, like a 5-foot setback around the perimeter of the property. Particularly on the left side, the west side, since that is a residential property fronting on Evelyn Place. Regarding the bicycle parking, my comment there is that the applicant should at least be prepared to discuss if there's any facilities being provided, which could be in the form of a bicycle storage room, could be in a basement, or closets for the apartments, or a covered bicycle rack so the bicycles are protected from the elements. Regarding the public sidewalk and walkways, the zoning officer and land use engineer have noted that the existing public sidewalk within the Nassau Street public right-of-way should be replaced due to its poor condition, and the central walkway from the public sidewalk to the building will be realigned, but there's this 2.5-foot wide, really narrow walkway around the rear of the proposed addition. Probably serves no purpose and should be removed. Regarding landscaping, no trees are being removed, and in terms of landscaping, only a small portion of the existing evergreen verge at the front of the property will be removed to just really accommodate a realignment of the walkway. One of the comments I wanted to add was that there appears to be room to add a small tree, could be flowering ornamental or a small shade tree in the front yard in front of the building, between Nassau Street and the front of the existing building to remain. I believe that at least 1 tree could be provided there. Some additional landscaping could be provided in front of the AC unit to further screen it from view, unless it's surrounded by a fence. And if the parking lot were to be reduced in size as suggested in my report, that would also be an opportunity to increase landscaping around the perimeter of the property. And ultimately, the landscaping, despite my comments, should be reviewed and approved by the landscape committee. In terms of the refuse container, there's, as I mentioned before, the proposed refuse container enclosure will be placed in the right rear corner, which is at the terminus of the driveway, so it's actually visible from view, from the street. It's actually enclosed by an attractive 4-foot tall picket fence, but my suggestion would be to consider relocating it from that present proposed corner to another portion behind the building. But in order to answer that question, we would need to get some understanding of how much trash really is being generated by the existing uses, as well as what will be generated by the proposed use. And additionally, the applicant should be prepared to provide testimony regarding refuse collection and timing. particularly since there's residential uses nearby. Regarding lighting, there's a proposed light accent lantern proposed on the main entry of the proposed addition on the side of the building. It's recommended that this be LED and utilize a warmer spectrum, which is 2700 to 3300 Kelvin. And there does not appear to be any site lighting.
What is the reason for that strange request?
I'm sorry?
You said you want to use warm white instead of white.
From what I have read, the warm light is better for circadian system because the harsh blue light actually negatively affects people when they go to sleep. And the warmer color is more of a natural color. It's the sunlight color. It's the fire color. So humans are more used to it. That's my opinion.
And they'll be on all the time?
That's a question that the applicant should address, whether actually there's a timing issue on whether there's timers or there's a motion sensor. In terms of site lighting, there does not appear to be any proposed, which that's good because of the residential neighbors nearby. But I just want to get clarification whether site lighting is sufficient through the use of the wall accent lights. And to further protect the residential neighbors nearby, I would suggest that house shields be utilized. And finishing up here, regarding the retail use that was approved in the 1993 approval, if I recall correctly, the architectural plans of this application appears to indicate that retail use is being removed. I just want clarification whether the retail use will remain. In terms of the design, I'm going to defer to the board and HPC as to whether or not there should be discussion regarding the design comments. But otherwise, I will request that the clarifications be made regarding the window wells. It's unclear as to whether it's covered or if it's open air. If it's open air, there should be some sort of protective barriers so people don't fall in. And there should be some testimony to clarify what's the purpose of the window wells if the basement is only for storage use. And the last comment is that regarding signage, as noted by the zoning official and the land use engineer, approved facade signage as approved by HPC should be shown on the plans. And that finishes my report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we hearing from the historic group now, or
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you're going to
So-
give us a summary of your
This will be a summary
rather long
of the Vice Chair's
memorandum?
memo dated July 23rd, 2018. So the applicant appeared before HPC for a concept review in June of 2017, where the HPC shared.
You have to talk into the
Okay.
microphone.
The applicant appeared before HPC for a concept review in June of 2017, where HPC shared their informal comments with the applicant regarding roof lines, projections, balconies, and architectural components where they were pretty dissatisfied with. The applicant took HP's comments into consideration when they redesigned the elements with their final design, which the commission was very pleased with. The rear portion of the existing structure consists of approximately 1,423 square feet, which will be demolished, and a new 3,880 square foot, 3.5-story addition will be constructed in its place. The original federal-style portion of the building that faces Nassau Street will be retained with minor modifications. A new main entrance will be installed on the elevation on the east building addition through double doors. HPC appreciates the various revisions to the project as suggested through HPC's concept review. The applicant current plan will retain the integrity of the existing historic structure on the property with minimal alterations. HPC made 20 recommendations, which is listed in their memo, which really is more specific to product material, the demolition, architectural transition of roof lines, and other elements of landscape, which I'm not going to go through, but is there for the board to review. HPC reviewed unanimously, subject to the recommendations mentioned, to endorse the applicant's application. The applicant's plans preserves and enhance the historic and architectural character of the existing historic building. The new rear addition has an appropriate architectural design that is compatible to the existing historic building, and the overall design is considered appropriate within the Jugtown Historic District.
Thank you. I believe, Mr. Tarr, it must be your turn now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have several folks here, and we could all be sworn in and get started. David.
Would you identify them for the record,
Sure.
Mr. Tarr?
David Mansour is on my left, and Bill King is all the way down at the end. They are both part of the King interests. Jim Kamalik, the engineer's in the middle, and you've heard from him before, but all four of us could be sworn together.
Sure. If you'd raise your right hand, you swear affirm any testimony you give this evening will be truthful.
I do.
Thank you.
We have a series of slides, if we could mark them all as a group as Exhibit A1. Bill King is going to lead you through the slides and discuss these issues that Mr. Cosenza has discussed with you. I just thought to just bring it back to sort of plain English. This is a mixed-use building, has been and can be. That's permitted. When you have a residential element of the mixed-use building, office, residential, the ordinance, the borough ordinance says that the vestibule for entering into the residential space has to be 10 feet high, 10 feet wide, 10 feet deep, 10 by 10 by 10. And it also can be no further from the street than 35 feet. We meet neither of those requirements, but we're better. And we'll explain why what we've got is bigger than that, a little different, but and very close to the parking, and therefore okay. But that, because it's a conditional use and we don't meet the conditional standard, it becomes a D variance, a 5-vote type variance. But that's what the 5-vote variance is. The rest of them are setbacks and so forth. But that's the big one that you've got to deal with. Mr. King is going to speak to it and show you drawings with regard to it. But I just wanted to be clear that that's the only reason that it's not just a C1 or C2. And with that, I think Bill is ready to go. He's got his slides, and he'll walk you through and take questions.
Thank you very much. The first slide is a elevation from Nassau Street of the structure, and as Ms. Kim referred to some minor modifications being proposed, the significant one is the removal of this roof that was added to the structure early.
Actually, if you can somehow move something on the computer.
We'll try the cursor.
So that the cursor shows.
Okay, okay.
We can see it.
I see. Okay, okay. Can you see the cursor?
The cursor on your screen? Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to remove that shed roof and repair the siding that's missing where the flashing currently flashes the roof into the structure. The other thing that we're going to do is repair some of the shutters on the building. Some of the shutters, particularly on the second floor where there are louvered shutters, are falling apart. So we're going to repair those and repaint the shutters and repaint the front door. The Historic Preservation Committee suggested that instead of using black, that we use a Princeton forest green, which looks black from the distance, but it's a very deep, deep green, and that's fine with us. We'd like to do that. We think that'll work fine with the yellow.
Pink polka dots and
Right. So we're willing to do that. Let's go to the second. This slide shows the location, very close to, it fronts on Nassau Street, but it's very close to the intersection of Nassau and North Harrison Street. It's directly across from Michael Graves' current office. The next slide shows the historic zone and the location of the lot within that historic zone. The next slide shows an aerial view of the property. And the next slide shows the overall plan of the site with the original structure in the reddish color, the existing addition in gray, and the new footprint, the new addition footprint in the yellow outline outside the existing addition. The next slide is the elevation from Nassau Street, where you can see the removal of the existing canopy, and other than the work on the shutters, and there will also be a removal of a Bilco hatch on the side of the building opposite the end where the canopy is being removed, and you can see that dotted. That's adjacent to the driveway. The next slide. The next slide is the elevation that is facing east towards Harrison Street. And we are, as you can see, we're not touching the front building that faces Nassau Street, which is on the left. There was some discussion from the Historic Preservation Commission that we re-look at two conditions. One is where the addition adjoins the front building, which is the notch in the buildings, and I'll speak to that in a moment. The other is a simplification of the entrance on the side. We tried to recall the front entrance on the side, since the side really will become the functional entrance for the building. And we designed what you see there. The Historic Commission asked us if we might look at some way to simplify that, and I have an alternate slide which I'll get to in just a minute. If you look at the 3 stories, the first level and the second level are all office, proposed, all office, and the entire historic structure in the front is all office. The 3rd floor in the addition is where we've located the apartments, and there are 2 apartments. There is a difference is noted in the memos about the size of the apartments. Aside from the correction that Mr. Bridger made about the number of bedrooms, it also indicates that the apartments that we're putting in are smaller. However, the original calculations of the apartments that existed before Mr. Graves converted them included the square footage of a connecting stair. It also included the square footage of a porch, and it included square footage for storage space inside those apartments. In our apartments, the footage does not include the stair. It does not include the decks that are outside. They're not part of the FAR. And we have also included storage in the basement, which we think is more functional, where we can store bicycles during the winter weather and other things that the apartment owners might have. So we've located that in the basement area, and that's not in the calculation. So in fact, the apartments that we're putting back are actually slightly larger than the apartments that were there originally. And one of the reasons why the apartments couldn't be restored is because the old configuration ceiling heights are too low and they wouldn't comply to code. So let's move on to the next elevation. Excuse me? Yes, there'll be rental apartments. And by the way, the floor plan for the apartments, which we'll see, no, we don't see it, but they are submitted right now as the perimeter walls of the spaces themselves, showing how the entryways work to the apartments, showing how the kitchens function, a bathroom, and the 2 decks, one for each apartment. I did not show internal walls. So they're referred to in the memos, the review memos as efficiencies, and we don't plan to have them as efficiencies. We actually plan to have them be 1-bedroom apartments. We could have one of them be a 2-bedroom, but the 2 bedrooms would be very small, and I don't think they would be adequate. And it's much more rentable if it were a 1-bedroom apartment. So we're planning on having 2 1-bedroom apartments. They'll show that if we get to a point where we can submit a building permit.
Yeah, I believe, though, that in a rental, the reason I ask if they're rental, they'll have to be ADA compliant.
Yes.
And that includes access from the parking into the building.
Yes.
So there may have to be a ramp to get into the building. The elevator will probably have to be bigger. and the bathrooms and kitchens, it just changes the whole configuration of what you're
Mhm.
doing. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, if we look at the next elevation, the west elevation shows the two decks. And this is on the this is the elevation that's common to the residential property that's contiguous to ours. The decks were put on this side to, again, break down the scale of that elevation. I want to point out that there'll be a can light on either side of the sliding door that you see coming out to the deck, where the can actually houses the illumination source. There will be LED, so the source will not be visible, and the light will be directed downward. The purpose of the light is really to be able to see the handle to get in and out of the deck itself. It's not to create a big light source. So I want to point that out. The next elevation, as best as it can show it, is a rendering of what we want the color to be. The color is more or less what's there now. It's a yellow color with white trim, and the door doesn't look forest green, but we, again, would like to have the door be forest green, and there'll be shutters on the windows in the front elevation, painted forest green as well. We are going to fix the roof because the roof has a belly in it where there's been a deflection. We're going to repair that and re-roof the building when we put the new roof on. And we have submitted all those colors to the HPC for approval as well. The next elevation, again, shows the proposed entry from the east side, from the Harrison Street side. On the left, that's the schematic. 219 Nassau is a building that I've owned down on Nassau Street further. That has a more simplified version of the left, still having divided lights and letting light come into the foyer. We prefer the left, but the HPC asked us if we would look at simplifying it, and the right would be a proposal to potentially simplify it. So we'll look for your guidance on that. The next slide is the vestibule. The ordinance requires a 10-foot wide by 10-foot deep by 10-foot high vestibule for the separate entrance to the apartments. In fact, we have only 9 feet 6 wide instead of 10, but we have 23 feet deep, and we have a 10-foot ceiling height in that vestibule. So we're slightly smaller on the width by 6 inches, but that's an important point because it's not the 10 feet that's specified in the ordinance. You can see a plan of what we're proposing for that entry door right below the word vestibule with one leaf open. That's intended to be the only active leaf of what appears to be a double clear light entryway. The other side would be a fixed leaf of the door, and the reason why we would like the pair of doors is because it allows much more light into that vestibule, which is actually a pretty good sized vestibule.
You can get in that with a wheelchair?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You have to get up into the building.
And the elevator presumably is big enough that you can go in and rotate the wheelchair and so you can come out when you get there.
We'll have to comply with all those regulations.
Yeah.
The other.
I'm sorry, just forgive me, will you address why you can't find 6 inches to meet the 10-foot?
Well, we're measured to the inside of the interior wall. If our measurement is to the inside of the interior wall, typically when we're measuring demise space in buildings, we measure to the middle of the demising wall. And I don't know what the regulation is, so I just erred on the conservative side and said it's to the inside of the wall. If we measure to the center line of those partitions, as we do demising partitions in a market situation under BOMA, then we comply with it. We've got that 3 inches on each side.
And what is the width of the staircase? Is that a 5-foot one?
The staircase is help me with it, David, is it 4? Yes. It's 4 feet wide.
You may
Full.
need
Okay.
2, though.
Mhm.
You may need a second means of egress, and you may need 2 stairs in this building.
We've reviewed that with the building department, and also with the DCA before that, and they both felt that this was adequate.
1 stair?
Mhm. Yeah.
That's surprising, but all right, they say it's workable.
Mhm.
I don't think it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the other 2 notes, which are below the 3 dealing with the vestibule, is the first one is that we're 22 feet from the nearest parking space, which is to if you look at the plan, it's to the right of the drawing. And we're 68 feet plus or minus from the sidewalk. And the ordinance requires us to be 35 feet from the sidewalk, I believe. So we exceed that 35 feet with a 68-foot amount, but we are close to our parking, where all the parking is behind this building. There's really no place on Nassau Street where you can park down at this intersection. It's a pretty busy intersection with a bus stop across the street, and it has a left turn lane as well as the through lanes. So it's very tight there, and it's not very practical to expect somebody to be picked up at the sidewalk on Nassau Street. And we think it's more practical that these be in proximity to the parking area behind the building. So we do need the variance for that purpose. The next exhibit is the no retail use. We asked for a letter from the corporate secretary of Michael Graves Architecture and Design, which is what this letter is a copy of, or this is a copy of that letter. And they state in here that they have not used the space for retail use, and they have no intention to bring back the retail use.
Excuse me, before we get off the building, all right, what is going to happen down in the basement? You have full-height windows.
Yes, we do.
In the front.
Because we're proposing 4 uses in the basement. One is for the mechanical space for the building that would include the incoming water service and our fire suppression line, because we're going to have a fully sprinklered building. And that valve, as you know, is a pretty big valve complex. So that's located there, as well as the mechanical room for the elevator equipment itself. We are also planning on having storage for our apartments and storage for our uses in the building. And we are also planning on having a plotter down there on one side of the stairwell, along with our print facilities down there. The plotter is pretty large. It's a 60-inch plotter, and the 2 printers that we have are fairly large, and they go in as part of our business. We're developers. We deal a lot with architects and engineers. I am an architect and engineer, and so we deal a lot with drawings and need to make a lot of copies of those things. So that's one side of the stair. The other side is we're planning on putting a conference room down there where we can use that conference room instead of sharing the conference room with the Graves group that's in there. They want to remain in occupancy for a few years at the end of their lease. They'll vacate, but in the meantime, the only alternative we would have is to share that room with them, and I'm not convinced in some of our preliminary discussions that that's going to work. So we've proposed putting a conference room at the bottom of the stairs. Not something that we're going to permanently occupy, but something that we will use occasionally.
So that's going to be, technically, that's going to be office space.
It'll be a bit of conference room.
But it's going to be office space. It's
Yes.
not going to be storage. So I guess parking may have to be an issue. Is that figured in your parking
Well,
calculation?
there's no permanent desks there, so the people that'll be in the parking, or the slots are actually going to be at desks up above, or they'll be guests of ours. And we feel that, there was a comment made in the planning memo about potentially reducing the parking further because we're in proximity to mass transportation and other benefits of being, kind of in an urban environment. But we don't want to reduce them any further because we do have visitors that come in occasionally. It's not every day, it's not every single week, but when we do, we usually like to break to a conference room and have the visitors go directly into that room as opposed to going through our offices.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Mhm. So this layout is the parking lot layout and setbacks, and Jim will go through those to indicate where they are.
Good evening.
As I think I noted before, Mr. Kamalik has been an expert as a professional engineer and planner a number of times before the board, if you'd accept his credentials.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. Pursuant to the plans that we've submitted for the project and as indicated here on slide 14, you can see that at the bottom of the slide, as I'm highlighting, this is the location of the new addition at the bottom of the page here, and to the right is where we have what is basically now the existing driveway access to the right of the building, and then the rear parking lot makes a 90-degree turn to the left in the area behind the building where we have parking on one side and parking on the other side. Now, for the most part, this parking configuration is largely in the configuration that it exists today, and it appears to work relatively well. We do have some photographs of the parking lot in operation, and as previously testified to, the plan includes a sharpening up and trying to make the parking lot more in accordance with the ordinance, with the delineation of the parking stalls, with 9-foot wide by 18-foot long stalls, standard size stalls where possible. It's 1 foot less in length of the required 19 feet, so some relief is being requested because of the tight quarters here on the site, down to 18 feet deep, which we feel would be advantageous in terms of, and if that's changed recently, then we wouldn't need relief. But we have 9 by 18, and additionally, we have compact stalls. I would say that a preponderance, certainly more than half of the vehicles that are parking in this parking lot are compact type vehicles. So we've located 8 by 16 foot stalls with a sufficient 2-foot overhang here at the end. Along the building, we've also added, which is not necessarily demarcated significantly today, a compliant ADA parking stall and access. So for the most part...
And that has a different...
yes, that would be a solid surface.
Solid,
correct.
yeah.
Yep. For egress from that into the building.
Yeah.
It has the access aisle next to it, and obviously any ramps to get you up to the building.
Yes, yes, that would all be provided for.
Okay.
Additionally, on the right side of the property or the entry drive, we've maintained the existing limits of the existing gravel. So we're really trying to maintain the way that the site functions today and what's presently out there. We have a 14-foot wide drive aisle that continues to the rear. And then in order to try to maximize the turnaround area in between the two parking stalls at 20 feet, we made some minor shifts. And I'll bring your attention on slide 14 here along the rear property line as I'm highlighting here this light gray line from this arrow here all the way across to, as I'm highlighting here, this light gray line. That's the existing edge of the gravel. So we're really in trying to sharpen this up a little bit, just expand it slightly to fit the proper size stalls, as well as get us a good 20 feet for ingress and egress out of these stalls.
What's the borough requirement for the aisle width?
I don't believe there's a specific requirement for the borough, but, you know...
Municipality, excuse me.
Well, in the borough, maybe Jack can speak to it. In the borough ordinance, I don't know that...
When
there's
this
an exact
application was submitted, there was no requirement. Actually, there is now, but this was submitted prior to that. And just one clarification on the parking stall size. The ordinance has been changed. That 9 by 18 is allowed now.
Okay.
So additionally, what we've done is where the parking currently is, I would say, approximately 2 foot and change or 3 feet from the property line, we've pulled that away from the property line to provide 4 feet here, and as I'm highlighting, an additional 4 feet here from the property line, and then we've allocated this additional 3 feet plus about 1 foot to the property line, so 3+ feet here just to give a little more area for turnout and egress. This was one of the comments in the engineer's report about the fact that this looks a little bit tight. We think we're moving vehicles further away from the property line, and the fence that exists is a 6-foot-high wood fence, so we see that as an improvement. And additionally, if warranted, we can certainly add perhaps 2 bollards in this location if to provide some additional protection. If we feel that's necessary, we're certainly willing to do that. The last thing I'll touch on is the recycling and trash enclosure area that I'm highlighting here, which is in the northwest corner of the site, number 2. I believe it's 6 foot wide by 12 feet deep, with 2 waste cans as well as 2 recycling cans, which we feel there would be relatively minimal waste from the office type use, but typical paper type waste, and then also from the 1-bedroom apartments. We feel that this area and the allocated cans should be sufficient for that. Now, in looking at the site, due to the horizontal constraints and the limitations out there, we felt that this would be really the perfect location for the trash enclosure area. So it's away from pedestrian view, it's further away from the streetscape and the frontage. Additionally, as I'm highlighting here on the right side of the plan, we have a significant hedgerow, upwards of 16 feet currently, and along the property line. And this would be enclosed with a solid wood fence around the perimeter. Additionally, this area too, as you can see here on the slide, it's a location of the mechanical facilities for the commercial building to the north. These are the AC units at this location. So it's sort of a support mechanical utility type area of the site. We've located the rear setback at 5 feet, which is the minimum accessory structure setback, so we comply there. Sorry about that. And we are maintaining the existing setback of 1 foot, which currently exists from the gravel parking lot to the property line. So that's a condition. We just held that edge, but variance relief, since 1 foot is less than 5 feet, we're requesting variance relief on that. Before I go to the next slide, just note that for the commercial building on the adjacent property, this is an existing parking lot over here, which has open parking in the rear of the building, as well as covered parking underneath the structure. And there's really no occupancy within that structure, that would result in any type of nuisance or hazard from this parking area. Additionally, there are existing plantings, some lower U's planted for a buffer along this property line, as well as some ornamental trees and some evergreens on the ends. So I already touched on this. We do have some extent of existing buffer that's provided by the neighboring commercial building on this side, on slide 15, as well as on this side. So therefore, given these conditions, we feel that sharpening up and making this parking area more in compliance with the zoning ordinance in terms of space allocation and pushing it slightly a few feet closer to the property line, serves a more significant purpose, noting the fact of the landscape buffering that exists on the 2 sides, as well as a 6-foot-high wood fence that abuts the adjacent residential property here, and 9 to 10 foot high evergreen trees that are behind that fence. There we go. Okay. Okay, so slide 16. This is going up the driveway on the right-hand side of the property before you make the left-hand turn to go to the parking lot at the rear. Where this vehicle is, that would be the location of the trash enclosure. That's why we felt that that would be the best location for it. This is a picture with a view towards the intersection of Harrison Street and Nassau Street. So you can see the existing buffer that's there, and what's on the other side of the buffer is a gravel parking lot, almost the same as this gravel parking lot. So, you know, we're really not out of character with the existing conditions from the adjacent property. Here's a close-up view of the area I talked about where the trash enclosure would be located with the AC units. The window behind is really just a false window for the staircase and mechanical room behind it, so there's no occupancy at that location or anticipated nuisance. This is a picture of just the open gravel parking lot and how vehicles orient themselves, with the vehicle on the right backing up to where the back of the new addition would be, and the two vehicles in front abutting the adjacent commercial property. Slide 19, this is a picture of that turnout where we have the existing 6-foot fence, and it was suggested maybe the parking should be shifted or reduce the parking a little bit to get it away from the fence. We're providing 4 feet with the new plan at this location, and then we'll have about a foot at this location, so the gravel would be extended slightly into the existing mulch here, and we can certainly provide a couple bollards for additional protection. But I think, as you can see, the site is relatively neat in the existing condition. The fence is there, and it doesn't have any significant abuse. It appears to function appropriately, you know, generally with the existing configuration. So we don't see any substantial problems with this. All of these points on slide 20 I've already mentioned, with the exception of we did hear that there was a concern about the migration of gravel and then possibly paving the parking lot. On our plan, we proposed, similar to the existing condition, where there are concrete precast car bumpers or wheel stops, basically, at the end of these parking stalls and the additional parking stalls to the right. The applicant, you know, is certainly amenable to removing the wheel stops and providing a nice aesthetically looking curb to the end of each of the parking rows, which would help to contain the vehicles, number one, and then provide an additional containment barrier for the existing pervious gravel parking lot. We've made some observation of the site since the application has been in. We feel that, you know, given the historic character of the property, the soft appearance of the gravel, how that works nicely with the historical context of the building, and as well as from a performance standpoint relative to being pervious through its full extent, given that it's...
Would you put the snow in winter?
Yes, it would be plowed.
Sorry?
There would be plowing in the winter of the snow.
Where do you plow it to? You're going to take up a row of car spots?
Well,
Lose 2 or 3 car spots?
If it's a deep snow.
what we've done is we've also provided, I believe the plantings that we've provided around the perimeter are low grasses, and they're less, they're not woody type plants. So there would be some additional areas around the perimeter for storage of snow, as well as there's area, like I said, this is 14 feet wide clear, where it's actually room for just one vehicle. So we feel that the width would be sufficient in these locations.
Excuse me, am I incorrect in my understanding that you all had appeared before us in the past and we had requested and you had agreed to pave the parking lot, and now you didn't do it then, and now you're coming back again? Or is that, did I misread something?
I don't recall that there was an agreement made for paving.
I was under the impression there was. Mr. Bridger, am I correct on that?
I don't recall recall that we made a site plan application. We came before you asking to be relieved of the two-apartment requirement. I don't recall that we had a site plan. Yeah.
I believe it was a former site plan, not this applicant, but we'll clarify the record here. So in the findings of March 22nd, further resolved, the approvals granted to this development application are subject to the following conditions and modifications which have been agreed to by the applicant. At that time, it was Michael Graves, architect. And number one was, in order to prevent gravel migration, the asphalt paving of the driveway will be carried from Nassau Street to the rear of the structure. Individual parking spaces will be defined by concrete wheel stops, and an evergreen hedge will be replaced, the proposed privet hedge. And that's about it on the parking, so. That was 1990, March 22nd, 1990, case number 563-1.
There were a series of cases. I guess we're not always sure which ones he followed through on and actually took advantage of, Mr. Graves. But this fellow didn't come in with a site plan for parking. But I hear you, Mr. Graves apparently agreed to pave the drive in, but not the parking stalls. We don't know whether he pursued that application, but...
Clearly he didn't, Mr. Tarr. Clearly he didn't, if it's not done.
Well, did he build the building that he asked for? I don't know what he asked for in 1990. But the point's taken. You heard somebody say they were going to pave the drive. And Mr. King says he'd prefer not to for the reasons that he stated, but it's just part of the application. You'll take it from there. Next slide.
I'd also like to mention that we did talk, Jim did talk about the curbing on the two long dimensions of the parking, but we also are going to provide Ryerson edging on the other ends of the parking and all the way down the driveway. There is curb on the entrance side of the driveway coming in because it has a different elevation. So we're looking at controlling that migration issue with Ryerson edging. And the reason for that is because I like the grass edge that you saw there. I'd like to keep it more natural and less paved once you get beyond the parking area itself.
Slide 21 just illustrates the general configuration of the parking lot, the way that it operates, as well as the significant compact nature of the occupancy and how we feel it's well suited, at least for this lot dimensionally. It was requested that a bicycle parking be provided here on slide 22, and we can certainly amend the landscape area and provide a bike rack at this location near the front entry.
Also, just to address the point that I said earlier, we will provide area in the basement for storage of those bikes in the winter time. So they won't be outside, they won't be in the weather, or if it's raining, they could bring them in as well.
In terms of the fence, we're highlighting here on slide 23 that this 4-foot-high white picket fence separates or provides a transition between the mixed-use building and the residential building that's to the left, where there is an existing driveway. This is the adjacent property here at this location.
Right, there was some note in one of the reviews about potentially replacing this picket fence with the stockade fence that runs beyond it to the right side, but I think this is better in terms of the residential transition. The issue is that we have to repair this fence and we have to repaint it, but you'll see the same picket type fence on the property adjacent to the garage that our neighbor has. It's just immediately to our west.
Is there, Jack, excuse me, is there a requirement that between a commercial property and a residential property you have a 6-foot fence?
don't believe there is.
There's got to be,
Excuse me.
I think there's some separation, isn't there?
Let me double check.
Or a solid fence, I guess I should say.
Well, we hope that the picket actually speaks more to the residential character of our neighbor and the residential part to our property. We're hoping, that's the reason why we put the decks on this side as well.
Okay. All right.
So whether it was a variance condition, which we're not sure that it is, or just a recommendation from staff, you saw the picket fence, the stockade fence, 6-foot-high stockade fence, backed by the parking lot. This is toward the front, and our request is, whatever the legal requirement, that we be allowed to keep the picket fence in this location across from the neighbor's picket fence.
Just to clarify why I made that request, is really, if you extend the 6-foot fence about another 15 feet, it shields the parking lot from the neighbor. That was the intent.
This is his driveway and his garage, not his house. It isn't.
His
here it's behind-
residential house.
Right, it's behind this building, so it's shielded by his own garage in that regard. So that was the thinking behind asking to leave the fences the way they are.
You want to talk about that?
This next detail is, the walkway will be realigned, so it's directly on the axis of the front entryway. And the gap between the privet hedge will have a proposed front picket gate detail, which you see to the left of the screen, again, to pick up that picket fence aspect of it, which we feel is more residential.
Slide 26 highlights the proposed site lighting. And as you can see, on each side of the entry door, we're proposing a lantern style fixture on each side in order to illuminate the walkway and the egress, as well as spill out gently into the driveway. The goal here was try to maintain the existing lighting conditions and methodology to the extent possible. We do have, we abut residences to the property, and we wanted to try to keep lighting to a minimum. So at the rear of the building, we're proposing a gooseneck mounted fixture that would be LED, and that would provide lighting, a majority for the stalls closest to the building, as well as spilling off into the drive aisle. And the plan does include some lighting levels of what this would look like, again, so as not to introduce deleterious light and spillage throughout the rest of the parking area, which doesn't exist today, and it does abut this commercial property, which does have some lighting on it. We focused on the utilization of these stalls and lighting the walkway where we felt that it would be needed. So since it doesn't meet the half-a-foot candle through the entire extent of the parking lot, some relief is being requested as part of this, but we saw this as an asset to try to keep the light levels low if the board is amenable to that.
These lights are on all the time?
That would
Or
be,
they're operated by movement?
We could operate them by timer.
Certainly, it's not a good idea to have them shining all night long.
No, in fact, in our other building, the lights actually have movement sensors on them. They have movement sensors on
Yeah.
them, so that when the apartment dwellers come in after office
The
hours.
light will be on, they
and
have a
the light-
chance to walk up,
Exactly, and then it'll go off.
and then the light goes off.
Correct,
Yeah.
that's how the.
Only there's enough residential stuff around the back there that permanent lighting would be unused.
Yes, it would be. I
That
agree.
actually is a requirement that they do have a timer when, or a motion detector.
Okay, this is the elevation we were talked about earlier, where there was a request by the HPC to relook at the connection detail of our addition to the front building. And we had done 3 different studies of how to connect these buildings. The most logical way architecturally is to have the peak of the addition line up with the peak of the front roof. And since we had adequate clearance under your height restriction for your ordinance, we had proposed when we repair the roof, the belly of the roof of the front building, that we raise it and raise the chimneys so it would be the same level, the same elevation as the addition, and the addition would tie right into it. But the HPC did not like that when they originally viewed our submission. So we decided to leave the front building alone and draw the addition further to the rear, so that when you draw the sight lines from Nassau Street, which I believe we have a slide here that shows how we wouldn't have the addition kind of looming over the front building. You can see the angle from a car on Nassau Street or the angle from a pedestrian on the sidewalk that shows that the front original building shields that, except for the chimney component of the rear building. So that's the reason for it. And the second reason, which is a more practical reason, is it makes it much easier from a construction standpoint to connect the buildings and make them watertight. Now, I will tell you that we did notice all of our neighbors to come to our office for coffee and cookies to talk about this application, and 2 of our neighbors did come, and we had a very, very nice conversation with them and went through the whole presentation that we're doing tonight, and they were extremely positive about this drawing that we're looking at right now. They live across the street, and they said there's been some recent...
They live on the other side of Nassau.
Correct. And they
Yeah.
said there's been some recent development where the addition is much bigger than the front building, and that they didn't like that. So they were appreciative of the sensitivity of trying to keep the addition roof peak further behind. By the way, they did offer to come tonight, and then they called and said that they were unable to attend, but I wanted to at least tell you that.
Okay, so slide 30 just highlights, as was previously discussed, the window wells to each side of the main entry, and we can certainly provide any necessary, protection around that pursuant to the building code in that location.
You'll need a railing at like 30-something inches.
Yeah.
We talked actually about using the white picket fence around it, and we have boxwoods planned, and those would be to the driveway side, in front of the fence.
The fence would work, sure.
Slide 31 indicates the existing signage at the site, which will remain and has been approved by HPC and zoning, as I understand it, and that would continue at this point. Slide 32 highlights the zoning compliance elements, and just to highlight on that, all of the elements are compliant with the exception of the bulk standard, a minimum side yard of 3.2 feet, and that's where the existing building is adjacent to the residential driveway near that white picket fence that we looked at before. That's not changing or being exacerbated, then that will remain the same. Additionally, we've highlighted the impervious coverage, the existing and the proposed, and as you can see here, when taking a look at the existing impervious coverage, and if you were to understand the stone driveway as impervious just for calculation purposes, we would have less impervious coverage in the proposed condition for the proposed addition than at least what's out there today at 75.6 compared to 76.5%, which is a slight decrease in impervious coverage. So also too, if you remember that slide from previous in the slideshow, there's only a slight exceedance beyond the limits of the existing addition that's being removed. with that yellow border around the perimeter. So we're taking off the existing addition and putting one that's slightly larger. Relative to the planner's comment about the addition pushing significantly into the parking, requiring the parking to be pushed further back towards the rear property line. Really, it's only 4 feet from the furthest point of the structure to the existing structure, if you measured that. So it's really a nominal distance at the rear that's being pushed back. So from that standpoint, we think that we have a good design, and we've tried to optimize it as much as we could within those constraints. To highlight the rest of the variances, we've touched on most of these already. 17A 270C1A, which is this D3 variance for the residential portion of the mixed-use building with a passage of 10 feet wide to have an entrance upon a street with a minimum width of 10 feet, a height of 10 feet, and a depth of 35 feet, and a direct entrance to the street, which in this case hasn't provided. I'll touch on that just in the variance proofs here at the end, where in terms of parking, 15 stalls are required and 13 stalls are proposed, which includes the handicap stall and the accessible area adjacent to it. We touched on the lighting, trying to keep that the minimum possible and close and tight to the building to eliminate nuisances. That's 17A 365.1. Also, the 5-foot side yard setback for an accessory structure, which is the trash enclosure, which is 1 foot away from the sideline, right next to that tree buffer at the edge of the existing gravel driveway at that same location where it's 1 foot on the side yard. So we're seeking that relief based on the purposes. E goes away because those stalls now are permitted, as I understand it, at 9 by 18, so we wouldn't need relief from that any longer. 387C requires a 4-foot minimum offset from any parking space from the property line. The proposed parking space at the minimum location, which is at the rear left-hand corner, at the tightest location at the rear, adjacent to that commercial parking lot at the back, it's 1.7 feet. And I think it's a little more than 1.5 feet further back than it was before. That's why I highlighted that gray line of the existing. So we're deviating from that just a little bit to sharpen it up. 387F, where a maximum in the ordinance of 15% of the parking stalls can be compact. We're proposing 31, and again, that's to efficiently locate and try to have as many parking spaces suited to the use on the property given the horizontal constraints. And again, you know, our preference is to maintain the gravel surface if permitted by the board and have it continue to function the way that it does today with the addition of the curbing as noted previously in the testimony.
Sorry? Jim?
Yeah.
If it's going to be, if it is gravel, if we accept that, it's hard for me to figure out how people know what their stall is. How are you making that clearer? Are you going to use
Do you want
that
to talk to
or
that?
curbing?
We're going to, in the curbing, where the cars, have their front bumper, we were planning on using granite curbing that would match in the gray, but take a dark piece of granite where the marker for each line would terminate, so you can see where the stall is defined. That's
So
the way
just
we were
in the front,
proposing.
but not,
Right, it wouldn't be paint on the gravel, but it would be delineated in the front. And we would indicate it that way with a rhythm, and that you'd be able to tell that's where the spaces are.
thanks.
Okay. So as I mentioned previously, in terms of the D3 variance, and testimony was provided as to the fact that in this particular case, the parking associated with the residential use is located at the rear of the property, which is within 22 feet of the main entry of the residential use. And in fact, the size of the vestibule is satisfied in terms of height, in terms of length, and almost entirely satisfied in terms of width at 9.5 feet. We certainly don't see any substantial detriment or negative impact from that, and it's driven by the configuration of the lot. So variance relief, we feel is warranted in this case, and to maintain that existing aesthetics of the site, and will be supported by Purpose I. Additionally, in terms of the parking, for the rationale, we previously mentioned that we have a residential use as well as the office use. Your planner mentioned that possibly even less parking would be necessary than the 13 that we proposed. And we have an additional restriction if needed. The residences would remove the vehicles during the daytime hours, which would be opposite of when the offices would typically be used, which we think works very well. So we're seeking relief from that. We feel that sufficient capacity would be provided, and we don't see any substantial detriment. The lot would continue to function the way that it does today. The 5-foot setback for the trash enclosure area, again, I mentioned that that's really the ideal location for it, so we're seeking that side yard setback to 1 foot. Similarly, the 31% compact stalls are proposed as opposed to the 15%.
Excuse me, I may have missed this in your testimony or someone else's testimony. Approximately how many people work in the building during the day? Approximately how many people work in the building during the day?
There'll be approximately 8 or 9 people.
In the entire complex, the 2 buildings?
Yes. Yeah, there'll be 8 or 9 people that are full-time, because we have project management people that are out on projects, and we have brokers that are out on the street, but they can't come back and use a desk. They're really not there full-time, and a lot of them, like the project management people, come in about 5 o'clock or 5:15.
Are you using the entire building?
No, we're going to share the building initially with the Graves folks. They've asked if they can stay a little bit longer in order for them to find another facility to move into. So we'll share it with them for a while, and then it'll take a while for us to grow into it.
Do we know how many people the Graves folks will be having
Well,
there?
that includes Graves people.
So 8 includes Graves people?
Yeah, that would be Graves people and our people on a
Thank you.
full-time basis.
Yeah, so just to summarize in terms of all the variances that we requested, in terms of the C variances, we feel that the positive criteria would be satisfied for special reasons, to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of lands that would promote the general welfare. In this case, restoring those 2 residential units that you deemed important for this site, promote the conservation of historic sites and district, and a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design arrangements. From the negative criteria standpoint, we've looked at the buffering, we looked at the fencing around the perimeter. We feel that we're providing enough parking, so we don't see any substantial detriment to the variances.
I'd like to ask a question about the vestibule and the residential stuff. And it seems to me that enough people get burned to death trying to get out of a building. Have you thought of putting sprinklers in that sort of area? I didn't hear you mention it, but
Yes, we're going to put a full fire suppression system in with water
it'll have
sprinklers.
a full-size
With water sprinklers. in it.
sprinkler system.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So that's the presentation. If you had questions or wanted to allow the public, we're ready.
Chris, there are 2 issues.
Yeah, we'll get.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the public who wishes to address this case? I see none. So it's us and them.
Mr. Tarr, I have a question for you for the board's benefit. Although we may be able to figure out certain recommendations that your clients don't want to comply with, I think it would be more helpful if you could somebody could run through the staff memo, and with HPC, perhaps you could just advise what you don't want to comply with, with both memos, so that the board understands.
Jim's going to take that, thank you.
Okay.
So from the zoning and engineering memo, item number 1 would be B1 landscape, the 6-foot high fence extension on the west side of the corner to the existing building that we previously discussed. We'd like to maintain that 4-foot high picket fence. E, surface water drainage. Again, we discussed removing the wheel stops, providing some additional curbing to contain the gravel, but still maintain the gravel surface and basically have 100% pervious surface throughout the area as opposed to just in the parking stalls.
And what about the stormwater management that's, pardon? Okay.
So, comment E refers to stormwater management, not the variance required for paving the parking lot. And the concern there is, I found a 1989 approval that showed a 20-foot landscape area on the westerly side of the parking lot. Also, it showed 4-foot buffers all the way around. Sometime between that approval and when you came in, I think it was 1990, the parking lot was expanded, and I didn't find any approvals for that. When you came in 1990, it just showed as existing parking lot. So my recommendation would be for that 20-foot area that was expanded without an approval that I could find, that you provide stormwater management to cover that increase in impervious surface.
You have a dry well scenario?
Not at this time.
Okay.
That's my recommendation.
Well, I can tell you, Jack, that I know that technically gravel parking lots are not considered pervious. They're considered impervious.
That's correct.
But I can tell you, I've been out there as recently as yesterday afternoon when we had that deluge that came down, and I've observed slight ponding in that back gravel area. I had to go over to the Whole Earth Center. I came back 45 minutes later, and most of that water was gone. So the water slightly migrates, some of it migrates down the driveway, but obviously some of it's percolating into the ground underneath that gravel.
Again, I recommend that they provide stormwater management for the increase in impervious. I mean, you do get a little bit of infiltration with gravel. It's minimal. It's hard-packed gravel over time. You really don't get a lot, especially in the heavy rainstorms.
So that's a recommendation, we hear you, and we felt we didn't need it, but you've asked for us to call them out, that we've called that out. The board should tell us what it wants to do. Are there others, Jim?
There's one more thing in the engineering memo. That's the 3-foot turnout area, trying to increase that on the west side where we have at the end of the parking next to the fence, where we only have 1 foot plus the 3 feet. We like to keep it that way based on the picture that we showed you and the 6-foot high fence that's there. We're certainly willing to add a couple bollards to provide some additional protection. We think that that will continue to function appropriately. From the planning memo, comment 5.1 was a request to get access from the adjacent neighbor's parking lot. That's not possible at this time, and we couldn't agree to that. 5.3, possibly shrinking the building size to provide more area for parking. We already discussed that it's a minimal increase, and what we have we feel will work. 6.3, a proposed landscape tree in the front yard. We have provided several redbud trees along the driveway going up, small ornamental trees. I believe that the distance between the back of the hedgerow and the back of the sidewalk along the front of this building is only 9 feet. So it's really an extremely small front yard, and we feel that that open space better serves the character or view of the building as opposed to trying to shoehorn possibly an ornamental tree in there that would obscure part of the front of the facade and The fact is that we have a larger street tree on the other side of the sidewalk in that location anyway, providing some shade. So it's certainly a reasonable request, but just given the tight quarters there, we don't think that it's a great fit. The last one is 6.6 to extend the fence to the existing building, and that's the same as B1 in the engineering report. Other than that, the applicant's amenable to complying with the requirements.
Just want to respond to the comment in 5.3, going back to the prevention of migration of gravel. I'm not sure what the board's feelings are on this, but I think we can understand there'd be some sort of maintenance along the perimeter of property. You just have to, pick it up, pull it in and gravel, just rake it, hard rake it, and you'll just maintain that edge as you need to. My concern, more I think about the 1990 approval, was that there should be a asphalt paved area extended to the rear of the building. I'm not sure that's really necessary, or do we have the time to figure out if that project proceeded, but I wonder if there's a solution where you could take the first 10 feet of the driveway past the public sidewalk and use a cobblestone or some material that's more hardscape that's appropriate, that maybe HPC could weigh on material. That way the migration of gravel doesn't go on the public sidewalk.
The cobblestone would be perfectly acceptable. That's fine.
We do have a detail, and we use that other places in town.
Okay, we'll get that.
So the suggestion was that rather than pave the driveway, as Mr. Graves had done, to take the first 10 feet with cobblestones and leave the rest in gravel. And just to be clear, the proposal was to do away with the stops, the concrete stops, and put a concrete or a Belgian block curb at the back, all along the back of the site and in front of each parking space. And that would keep the gravel from migrating. As well, it would be a curb.
Well, we know that the HPC typically does not support Belgian block curbing, and I'm not sure how they would feel about, they had no objection to the gravel.
Right.
You know, they felt that it was appropriate because they have also a gravel walk, which they talked about, I think the applicant recall, and they felt that that should be consistent. So, I mean, I understand the migration issue, but.
So it could be concrete. No, they've preferred concrete to stone.
Has to be old Roman concrete.
Mr. Tar, was HBC fully addressed now, or?
HPC, you had a number of.
I know, that's why you can either.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you could just identify what you object to.
Did you have that? There are.
I mean, some are simply comments, but others are actually recommendations.
I think number 11 was the only one, additional plantings. That was the one that
So
was
is it
similar
that
to elsewhere. We thought we had enough plantings.
And that also goes along with number 13, because there is a buffer between the adjacent lot, the two gravel parking lots, separating. If you look at number 12, we're providing a wood fence enclosure around the AC units. Therefore, we don't feel that additional landscaping in such a small area is required, so that we'd prefer not to do.
So,
other than that, I think everything else is okay.
The two technical matters, if the board's inclined to approve. The Bill's pointed out that the Graves people are there. They're planning to move. He is concerned about being able to really get the project going until they're ready to leave, and that might be 2 or 3 years. So you have a 1-year requirement for use variances, but that could be extended in a proper circumstance, and we're asking the board to consider allowing us to have the Graves folks depart before Bill begins that work. Second, a second technical issue. Mr. Graves was required to record a deed, which I believe simply allowed for the retail use, but when the retail use was done away with, it said when he left, it had to be done away with. There's been testimony that's already been done away with, but there's a recorded deed, and I think it either has to do only with the retailer, or it may have to do with the apartments. What we're asking is that if we're perfectly fine to do a new deed, as laid out by your lawyer, but we have to get rid of the old deed. The old deed is no longer applicable, and it'll foul up the legal title. So if you want to confirm that the 2 apartments, for example, have to stay upstairs, that's fine, or that there be no retail. Whatever you'd like to put in a deed, it's fine, but we're asking that the resolution confirm that the old deed would be replaced with a new deed to clarify that those old conditions are gone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
We asked you for that the last time we were here, and you said come back with some apartments, and we're back with apartments. So whatever the deed said, we need to just get it off the record.
Mr. Tarr, this extension you want with respect to the, I guess when you pull your building permit?
Yes.
How long an extension?
We plan to close on the building sometime in the first quarter of next year, and at that point, there'll be a few months left on the Graves lease. They've asked us if we'd give them a 3-year short extension to permit them to find another place that would accommodate them, and I would like to accommodate them if we can. They've been very, very good to us, and in order to do that, I'd like to be able to allow them to stay to that end and get out of the building before we do the construction. It's not going to be very practical for them to be inhabiting the building when we do construction, because we've got to tear up the parking lot and we've got to, excavate the back.
Is that a total of 4 years, or from now? Or?
Well, from now, it would be a little less than 4 years.
A little less than 4 years?
What staff's discussing is that 4 years is kind of a long time, so.
You see, we can't buy the building, until they know that there's an approval and the folks are there. That's just the timing as it sorts out between the buyer and the seller, but.
And this property's in the former borough, correct? Okay. I think it would be helpful if we could just check again what the ordinance says, because unlike the former township ordinance, it's more specific. The
Right.
township one is open-ended. You
Yeah,
can give
it's
as
a-
many
yeah,
extensions
I
as you
believe-
want. The boroughs is not structured that way.
Well, I think that speaks to extensions when your 1 year's run out and you come back in and say, I'd like an extension here. If you gave it initially, all we're asking for is that the 1 year not apply, but see what it says. He is. It's like we want to,
There would still be a requirement based on the vesting disappearing for the new owner to put the addition on and put the apartments in. It's all part of the application. I mean, the dilemma here is that until we get the approval, we can't get our financing.
Yeah.
And that's going to be first quarter of next year, and their lease runs out the end of the second quarter, and that doesn't give them enough time to go and find another lease, or who's going to be the owner of the building, whether it's us or whether the state's going to continue to own it. So they've asked us, would we give them an extension for 3 years from the end of the current lease so that they can do that.
3 years.
And so we're
3 years
asking.
seems to be a long time. I mean, buying the building now or getting the approval now makes sense, so you can, deal with purchasing it, but then going ahead and delaying the construction for 3 more years, so for almost 4 years seems to be an awfully long time.
Well, it's,
Just my opinion.
I understand that. At the same time, I understand the dilemma they're in because that's the business that we're in as a landlord-tenant. And, you know, I can understand, you know, it's not particularly great for me either because we're in a rising interest rate environment. And so if I can't do the addition for 3 years, I'm going to have to pay more money for interest for the addition. But I think the accommodation is a reasonable accommodation given the fact that Graves has been a business in our community for such a long period of time. A 3-year extension seems relatively short compared to the, whatever it's been, 30 years they've been here.
Okay.
You don't know that they'll be there for 3 more years, do you?
No, they could move out before that. They've asked for that.
And also, is there any reason why we can't give you a 1-year extension and have you come back each year and get another 1-year extension?
Other than having to pay Mr. Tarr and ask you to take up all your time? No, I guess not.
Well, do you have to come before us to get an extension? No. All right. I agree with you.
It's already a very expensive process that we've been through.
I wondered, would there be any possibility in that 1 or 2 or 3 year time frame for you to do the front, you know, changes that you're going to, you know, the painting and the redoing of the shutters and that type of thing? Because it's pretty run down right now.
It is.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Result is that you can get a 1 year, your use variance is good for 1 year. And
It's good for 1 year, and then you get another year.
And you have to come back for 1 more year, so you think
It's
the
2
ordinance
years.
only allows 2 years in total.
Question for you. As long as the Graves folks are in the space, you're saying you can't undertake to do the apartments? Or what is it that you can't do when you have the Graves tenants there?
We can't really remove the back of the building, the existing addition, and excavate for a new basement and put up the addition that we're proposing. Because the site's a pretty tight site, and we need to use it, be able to put the machinery in to do the excavation, stockpile the dirt, and the materials that are necessary to construct.
So if you come to the zoning board of adjustment for an adjustment or a variance from the ordinance, and the ordinance says you can only have 2 years, I mean, I would recommend that we take the 1 year and then come back a year from now and ask for as much time as we need, that a variance from the additional 1 year time frame. It says 1 year.
Besides, I mean, the ordinances are being revised, you know, pretty regularly, so it could be that in a year, this is not on the books anymore. It's possible. I'm simply pointing out that conditions are changing, so.
Well, we've taken 5 years to try and get the ordinances unified, so them taking 4 years to get out of it.
But Mr. King, so you're saying because the Graves folks need parking back there, right?
They do.
Okay, so I mean, but that's the impediment. It's not because it's going to interfere with their use of the office space.
No, they will have some less office space because they currently use office space in the addition.
Okay.
And they would try to cram into the front part of the house. We've been through this with them, and the real limiting step is how much can they cram into the front, and where are they going to park at the end of the day? Because there's not going to be any parking in the back.
I don't think you can build and have people working in that place.
No, we don't think that's practical either.
Doesn't make any sense.
Because remember, we're going to put new sprinklers in, and we're going to put the sprinklers in the front house at the same time. So even though the majority of the work is in the addition, there is some work that has to happen in the original house.
Where are we now, Mr. Chairman? We're just talking. I'm in favor of much of what you have said. I like the changes that you all have agreed to. I'm very uncomfortable granting a 4-year opportunity to build. I think it goes against our rules. It goes against everything we've done before. And I am uncomfortable doing it. So if y'all are amenable to doing what Mr. Tar had suggested, then that's something I would be able to support. If you're adamant about needing this 3-year extension, I'm not comfortable with that. I can't speak for anyone else on the board. It's setting a very dangerous precedent. I know each case comes before us on its own individual merits, but at the end of the day, we have to be accountable. I don't like it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and probably a little bit of this is my lack of understanding and ignorance. For all the 45 years I've been in this business, I've not come, except one time when I was young, to a zoning board of adjustment. I usually end up in a planning board, and the planning board approvals we typically get, unless they're very large projects like my Carnegie Center project, they have a standard period of time of 3 years with 2 one-year periods of extension. And so I thought that that was reasonable, the request, consistent at least with what your planning boards do. But I'll have to plead ignorance here. I just didn't know.
But, Mr. King, that's because that's what the state municipal land use law provides. That if you get major site plan approval, you would get periods of protection from changes in zoning, and you could argue that that would protect you then from having to come back and get a variance, even though we have required that from other applicants. But in this case, it's minor site plan, and there are really no standards for that. So we don't have anything to go back to say, okay, well, there's a state standard, let's go with that. We don't have one here for a minor site plan.
I think it's true that at the planning board for a major site plan, you can use the time periods that you recommended. This is a minor and there is a D variance. If that's your rule, that's the rule.
It looks like Mr. Tar isn't ready to retire.
So we apologize for the additional time, but that we understand that the approval would last for 1 year, and we'll have to come back and ask you for an extension, and just do what we ask you for as much time as you'll give us a year from now when we explain where the tenant stands. And we thank you.
So what we'll do is to
Approve if you
approve or not approve what you've proposed. And then you'll have to come back on some time structure that is nothing to do with the board, but with the rules that haven't yet been written.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
I can't think of any way around it.
there's always been this long-standing obligation to do the two residential units sooner than later. And so to see that go on for another, 4 years or whatever, that's another sort of issue, especially if you want to change the deed too.
So then I guess, are we ready to make a motion on this and decide whether the appropriate variances that they've requested are appropriate? I mean, if we say no, they'll have to go away and come back in 4 years.
So I make a motion to approve.
I'm sorry?
I make a motion to approve
You make a motion to approve.
with, at this point, with the changes that we've discussed, but I don't have all of them. I'm hoping that our esteemed attorney will be able to bring us up to speed as to what the motion covers.
We can't tell them how to build their property, or paint it.
Mr. King has committed to,
They can do whatever they,
on a voluntary basis, he's committed to paint as soon as he buys. He's said that. But
I
it's-
mean,
I'll make a point to notify you when we're ready to start painting.
so I believe we have a motion and a second to approve what is being requested, with the dubious question as to how frequently they have to come back and ask for extension. Okay. Can you call the roll for?
Yes. Mr. Tenenbaum,
Yes.
Mr. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Davidge,
Yes.
Ms. Colson,
Yes.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Mr. Schreiber,
Yes.
Chairman Royce.
Yes.
It's approved.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See you in a year. If not sooner.
No.
Okay, I think we've got one more case still this evening, or not? We do.
See ya.
Another short break?
Do you want another 5 minutes? No problem. So we're going to take a 5-minute break before hearing the last case that we're hearing, which is 20 Green Street, if I understand it properly. And Mr. Floyd is not going to be part of it.